Have you ever just sat on a beach watching the waves crashing into the shore and retreating back out to sea? Have you noticed driftwood or shells being dragged back out, not knowing where they would end up next? Every morning I sit here looking out into the ocean where the gray sky meets the dark water on the horizon. I wait to see if one of them wash in with the tide, drifting up onto the hard-packed sand. As soon as I see them, I run from my position, grabbing them and dragging their limp bodies further up the beach, laying them to rest in the soft sand near the brush-filled dunes. And that's when I set to work. It's a ritual I performed since I was a child, being trained by my father just like his father did for him. I look down at the body, always different, sometimes a man, sometimes a woman, ranging from a younger adult to decrepit and old. Some have been thin, some obese. Once the drifter was missing a leg, making the ritual difficult to perform in its entirety. I make do though. I lay them on their backs, feet facing land and head to the water, their arms stretched out to their sides in a crucifix position. I know that I have to work quickly before they wake up. I've never had the misfortune of seeing it before, but I've been told stories of what happens if they wake before the ritual is complete. The entire island could be erased in the blink of an eye. Generations of work, my bloodline, all for naught. I'm getting distracted, sorry. The ritual. While in the crucifix position, I start the runes. Beginning with each hand and foot, I carve the same sequence going inward towards the body. From the tips of the fingers and toes, moving counterclockwise from the left hand to the feet and finishing with the right hand. The work is methodical. My knife moves with a determined precision, honed with 20 years of practice. Their blood flows blue, staining the sands with an almost neon hue. A sense of ammonia lingers with it. When every limb has been carved, I start at the top of the head, moving from the small bump in the middle of their forehead down toward the chest. They bleed much more when I get to the neck, as one of the runes must cut right across the jugular. Their blood sprays, leaving a shower on the surrounding sand. Some days it mixes in with a drizzle of rain, creating a bluish mist that floats across the beach. Finally, the runes are finished. The ritual is almost complete. I lay my knife down and wipe my hand across the drifter's throat, making sure that I have enough blood to finish. I swipe their blood across my own forehead, leaving a horizontal line above my eyes, and then drawing a vertical line under each of my eyes. This is my war paint. I alone stand against these terrors, protecting my island community and by extension, the world. The preparations are done. I pick up the knife once more and walk to meet the crashing waves. The final step. My hand dips under the salt water, opening with my palm up. The waves crash in, and as soon as they begin to be pulled back to the sea, I swipe the knife across, letting my own blood flow freely and mix with the water. This is the final offering, the plea to whatever gods rule over the sea, to end this monstrosity and keep us safe. The salt water stings as I bring my hand back up, the cold air adding to the pain. My feet slide across the sand as I walk back to the drifter. Lifting the knife, still dripping with the mix of my blood and salt water, I plunge it into the middle of the drifter's chest, into the diaphragm. The same reaction every time. Their eyes snap open, a final and desperate gasp for air. All in vain. I've severed the muscle that allows them to draw breath. They slowly drown as whatever blood is left in them fills their lungs, screaming curses in a language that I don't understand. When the ritual is done and the last spasms go through their bodies, I grab the can of gasoline and the herbs that I keep in the small shack on the beach. I douse the bodies, setting it to light and throwing the herbs on top. Like sage for cleansing spirits, the bundle of lavender and catnip smolders, sending wisps of their scent through the air. With this, the drifter is cleansed and the island safe once more. I head back to the village, taking the beaten path carved into the brush by the generations before me. I exchange nice pleasantries with others as I pass by. They thank me for what I do, protecting us from the drifters. I simply nod, telling them that it's my duty and nothing more. I make my way to the village square, heading into the courthouse at the other end. Briggs, our mayor, is waiting for my daily report. He looks up from the papers that he's signing as I walk into the room. "Riley, how are you doing today? Any happenings at the shore?" He shuffles the papers aside and leans back in his seat, motioning to the chair across from him. I sit down in the stiff leather chair, hearing it squeak under me. "There was one, older, male. They're coming more often these days. This is the third one this week. When I started 20 years ago, we got one every 2 weeks or so. Should we be worried, sir?" His brow furrowed with worry. He was an older man, at least 60. He had lived on the mainland for a while before coming back to the island in his younger years, world-weary and in disbelief at what we had to worry about compared to the outside world. They knew nothing of the drifters, the dangers that they posed to our world, the heretic god that they served. We'll certainly need to keep an eye on it. The records show that more show up preceding times of trouble. The earliest that we have on record preceded the Black Plague. They were at an average of 2 drifters per day, with the highest number being 5 washing up at once. Your post was manned by 5 watchers around the clock, making sure that none went uncleansed. We must be vigilant to make sure this doesn't become a problem like then. "Do you think there could be something terrible on the horizon?" I asked. I was the only one trained in the ritual. My father had me to help when he was my age, and his father and brothers before him, but I was alone. I had taken no wife and I had no living children, and my only brother was killed as a child. If they began washing up more often, I was the only defense. As of yet, there's no way to tell. We simply must pay attention, find someone from the village that shows promise and take them to be trained. You may need help. He answered, waving me off. I got up to walk out. "Rally." I turned back, giving him a questioning look. He dug around in his desk drawer before withdrawing a long and thin blade and a black scabbard. He pulled the blade out of the sheath by a few inches, showing me a pristine edge with the runes that I use inscribed on it. He sheathed it again and handed it over to me. "This has been handed down from elder to elder. If the time comes when there are too many use this, it allows the ritual to be bypassed." I bowed and thanked him as I took the saber. In all my research and learning about my position, I had never heard of this. We had always been told the ritual was the only way. I headed out and back to my house, lost in thought as I walked. I was shaken from my daydreaming by screaming coming from down the path, the direction of the shore. "Rally! Rally!" Vale, one of the village teenagers. She was shouting for me in a panicked voice, fear rising to overtake any other emotion. "Quick, you have to go to the shore." "What's going on?" I stopped her as she ran up, panting for breath. She leaned over and grabbed her knees, gasping. "Another one, a drifter. Some of the kids were playing in the water and it washed up," she wheezed. Shit. I didn't even wait for her to finish. When she said drifter, I took off, sprinting with all the energy that I had. They never washed up past noon, rarely even after daybreak even. 2 in one day, this is bad. If one wakes up while I'm not there, ruin would follow. Thankfully, it wasn't far to the shore. As I passed over the dunes, I saw the children gathered around it. The drifter this time appeared to be a woman, old and covered in wrinkles. One of the children had a stick of driftwood that they were using to poke at it, nudging it as the waves lapped around. "Stop!" I shouted, waving my arms as the children continued poking. They looked toward me, a quizzical glint in their eyes. "Get away from it!" It happened in slow motion. The drifter's eyes opened. Their unearthly green hue, like emeralds reflecting a blue sea, shine through the haze. I saw the sharp teeth bare themselves and the hands reach for the nearest child. Long claws tore skin and red blood mixed with ocean spray. I heard the boy scream in pain before turning to a low gurgle as blood filled his throat instead. I wasn't thinking. Instinct took over and I drew the blade that I had just been given. The runes reflected the gray sky, the sharp edge of the blade shining like the sea. I jumped at the drifter and plunged the blade between its neck and shoulder, stabbing downward through the chest and into the gut. It let out a high screech and the wind around picked up, intense howling echoing the drifter's cry. The ocean churned in response, sea foam churning into madness where calm small waves were before. "Die!" I screamed. I plunged my hand down into the wound, covering it in blood and painting my face with it. I withdrew the sword, quickly slicing my palm and dipping it into an incoming wave. The drifter screamed again. Clouds moved in, erasing any light that was left. The weather turned from a gray morning to a small hurricane in moments. I knew this had to end quickly. In one deft movement, I stabbed upward, bringing the blade out of the water and impaling the creature, right in target. The screams had died out along with the wind. Peace had returned to the shoreline. I sat there for a moment, collecting myself before turning to look at the red mixed with ocean. The poor boy, his throat torn out, had passed. I took him in my arms and carried him up to dry sand before going back and gathering the drifter's body. I covered the boy with my coat and the creature with gasoline. I wanted it to feel the flames of hell. I sat and watched it burn for a while. Long after the local doctor had come and taken the boy, his mother screaming in grief as she had watched. I couldn't come up with words to say that I was sorry. I was supposed to protect these people. I was the one that should be dead. When the last ashes had fizzled out, I still remained, thinking to myself what could be done to prevent this from happening again. I didn't know that it would only get worse from there. There were two this morning. I was waiting, watching the sea thrash and roll. I'm not sure when I drifted off. The same nightmare that kept me up the night before covered me again, leaving me in fits. I saw the boy's corpse laying in the waves, blood being pulled out with the sea foam. Suddenly, the clouds started rolling in, wind whipping up sand and spray. I saw lightning flash down the shoreline and felt the thunder boom in my chest immediately after. Something was coming. The waves grew taller with each one that crashed ashore. When I looked closer, I saw that it wasn't just water hitting the shore. Drifters, hundreds of them, all tangled into each other in the waves, piling on top of each other as they hit the shore. Levees made of bodies started to block the waves. Suddenly the sky opened up above me. The wind stopped and the ocean calmed. The drifters lay in their piles, sleeping like the dead. The eye of the storm. Just as soon as it had started, it was over. A million eyes snapped open at once. Their screams layered each other, creating an unholy chorus as they awoke and began flooding inland. Right before the flood, I caught a glimpse of the horizon. Gray clouds mired above rolling waves. Through the rain and wind, I could see something moving against the sky, wading through the depths of the water towards my home. I had seen pictures of skyscrapers and this dwarfed them. Just as it began to become clearer through the sheets of rain, a bolt of lightning struck in front of it. I awoke with a start, jumping from the stand and looking in the direction that it had been. The flood was gone and the day was gray but still. Just a dream. I shook the sleep from my eyes and resumed my vigil. I spotted one washing in with the waves. Male, middle-aged. Other than the bump in the middle of their forehead and the long claw-like nails, he could have passed for a normal islander. I set to work and was almost done with the carving when I heard a voice from behind me. "There's another one." I looked up, startled. Nobody else came out here this early. After what happened, I didn't think anybody would ever come here again. I was surprised even more to see that it was Vale, now nodding towards a shore a ways to my left. I followed her gaze and saw another motionless form crumpled there, sea foam washing over her. "Damn it all," I muttered. Time to kill two birds with one stone. I left the one that I was working on and walked over to the new arrival. Before grabbing this one, I dunked my hand into the water and sliced my palm, completing this part of the ritual ahead of time. As I began to drag the body back towards the first drifter, Vale ran up and grabbed the other arm, helping me along. "It wasn't your fault, you know," she said, grunting with exertion. "I was nearby when they found it. I should have told them to get away before I came to get you. I didn't even think they would do something like that." "Don't blame yourself," I replied, letting go of the new drifter and kneeling down next to the first. I took out my knife and I plunged it into the diaphragm. The piercing scream began and then died out quickly. The new drifter didn't stir. "If they're showing up more often, you're going to need help," she said again, still watching as I doused the first one and struck a match. "Teach me, I can handle it." I didn't answer her, but I threw the match down and started carving up the new drifter. Small sizzles could be heard as ocean spray and light rain hit the burning body. I could still feel Vale's eyes on me, intently watching my hands work the knife through skin, carving my legacy in a living canvas. When the runes were done, I beckoned for her to follow me to the water. She stood beside me as waves lapped over our feet. I looked out at the gray sky and rolling sea, remembering the moment my father brought me out here, how he had carved the runes and then walked me out to the water. "Have you ever lost someone, Vale?" I asked her. She seemed taken aback by the question at first, and looked down at the water as she pondered it. "You knew my mother," she said. "You knew I lost her." "You didn't know your mother. She died giving birth to you. Have you ever lost anyone you truly knew and loved?" I shot back. "Well then, no, I guess I haven't." I sighed and unholstered my knife, turning toward her. "If you take this on, you will lose someone that you love, maybe more than one. That's what we give up in order to protect the island. Are you prepared to take that on?" She seemed scared, and I couldn't really blame her. She saw the aftermath of what happened yesterday. She knew what we would be dealing with. But underneath the fear, there was a desperation. Desperation to prove her strength and protect others. "I am," she finally answered after staring out at the foaming waves. "What do I have to do?" "You're not of my bloodline, but there are certain cases where others can be allowed in to take over." I looked down at my hand, the cut already clotted with blood. I swept the knife across to reopen it. "Come, we have to go further out." When we were waist deep in the water, I handed her the knife. "Cut your palm and hold it open," I said. She winced as the sharp edge of steel sliced her hand. The blood flowed quickly, dripping into the water and leaving a red cloud. I held my hand above hers, making a fist and squeezing so a trickle of blood fell onto her cut. I then opened my own palm, placing it flat on hers so that our cuts aligned, and I took her hand under the water. She drew a deep breath in through her teeth as the salt water hit open flesh, but composed herself quickly. "I, Raleigh Karras, do hereby pass my bloodline onto Vale Jensen. Having no living children and having taken no wife, I realized that any day my bloodline may die and our cleansing end. Vale has offered herself as a tribute to the ocean, pledging to protect the island and all inhabiting it from the drifters and the heretical gods they serve. Do you accept this duty, Vale? Yes, she replied. I motioned for her to walk further into the water, letting go of her hand. She looked at me asking, How far? Until the sea takes you, I replied. She nodded, walking further. At about 10 meters out, she was completely engulfed, going under the water. She came up moments later, walking back to my position. Her usually wild and curly hair was now limp and soaked around her shoulders. She shined with a new purpose as she rejoined me. You are aware that with this acceptance you may never leave the island, being the first and last defense against the unknown. You know that the ocean requires a heavy toll for your service and the power bestowed upon you. Do you still accept? I hoped that she would say no, but knew in my heart that she couldn't. It was the same feeling I had thinking back to when I took the oath, my father standing in my place. Once you had the notion to take on this duty, it never left you. Yes, she said again. Vale Jensen, by my power and authority being the last remaining of my bloodline, I surrender you to the sea. Today you are born anew in the salt and brine of the ocean. I withdrew my hand from the water, turning my fingers down so the mix of salt water and blood coated my fingertips. I drew the rune of rebirth on her face, a clockwise spiral ending in a smaller spiral spinning counterclockwise from the center. The ever-flowing dichotomy of life in the sea. I swear to serve with my life, she replied, giving a small bow. We'll start your training tomorrow, I told her. For now, I'll finish this ritual. You will walk back to the village and stand in the square until I return. Tell anybody that asks you that you are now my apprentice. Yes, sir, she said, walking back up the beach. I sighed as she left, taking myself back up to where the newest drifter lay on the sand. I kneeled next to it, hefting my knife once more. I placed it above the diaphragm, one hand holding it steady while the other one was poised above it, ready to thrust downward. I bowed my head, closing my eyes and whispering a prayer. Protect her. Let me be the father to her that I could never be to my own daughter, I muttered. My hand raised up, tensing at the expectation of pain when it hit the knife handle. I was more surprised to feel the hand on my wrist as it moved downward. My eyes snapped open to see the drifter grabbing on, holding my hand back. Our numbers are infinite. We serve and we will be rewarded, and we will devour you, drown you in the blood of your loved ones. We are vast as the ocean and relentless as the waves. We will break you. The pure hatred in its eyes terrified me. I had never seen anything like it, the pure, dripping spite. It bore through my skin and into my soul. It despised me, and that cold, unfeeling stare almost seemed to freeze the entire world. I forced myself to move as it opened its mouth wide to scream, making the wind pick up and clouds go dim. My other hand plunged the knife in. Its screams turned to wet gurgles as it drowned, choking on blood. I fell back in the sand, shaking. After what seemed like an eternity, I pulled the knife from its chest and got the gas can and herbs, beginning the final step of the cleansing. I didn't stay to make sure the fire was put out, but instead I rushed back up the path to the village, stopping at the first person I saw. Hello, Raleigh. Anything I can do for ya? He said. I didn't remember his name, but recognized him from the butcher shop in town. I need you to go to the shore and keep watch. If any wash up, come and get me. I'll be speaking to Briggs in his office. He looked at me quizzically, not quite understanding why I would want an untrained person watching the shore. I ended up losing my temper. Just go! He tore off up the path, leaving a dust cloud behind him. I rushed into the square, grabbing Vale, who was standing in the middle. chatting with some of the village women who were congratulating her. We barged into the office to Briggs' surprise. "Raleigh, you didn't tell me you'd chosen an apprentice already. I should have had final approval." I cut him off before he finished. "What is happening, Briggs?" I shouted, causing both him and Vale to wince in return. One of those things grabbed me and spoke. They have never spoken before. His eyes grew wide. I could see Vale bring a hand to her mouth next to me. Briggs sat back in his chair, reaching into a drawer and pulling out a tall bottle filled with dark amber. He produced 3 glasses from the same drawer and started pouring. "I'm sorry for overstepping your authority," he said, raising the glass to his lips and sloshing half of it down his shirt from shaking hands. "I had hoped this wouldn't happen while I was in charge. Guess I hoped for too much." He drained his glass and then got up and walked over to a portrait on the wall. Pulling the portrait up and setting it down on the floor, he revealed a safe behind it. He opened it and pulled out a large, leather-bound book, yellowed with age. The next item that he revealed was an old flintlock pistol. "Everything you'll need to know is in there," he said, motioning to the book. "I'm sorry, but it's just too much." He raised the gun to his temple and he cocked the hammer. I barely had time to grab Vale and divert her eyes when he pulled the trigger. Warm blood and sharp skull fragments sprayed over us. The past 24 hours have been a blur. I only remember walking Vale out into the square, both of us spattered with blood and gray matter. Everybody looking at us, some screaming, some crying. I sat Vale down on a bench and motioned for a nearby woman to come over. "Take care of her. If she's not in shock yet, she will be soon." I said and then turned to walk back into the building. "Also, call for the doctor. I'll need his help moving Briggs." The smell had already gotten bad inside. Copper, sharp. It took me by surprise after dealing with the ammonia-tinged blood of the drifters for so long. I looked down at Briggs' body, small wisps of steam rising from the open wound as cold air drafted in. "You coward," I muttered to his body. For probably the first time since my father had brought me out to the beach, I was scared. I had seen the soul drain from Briggs' face when I told him about the drifter speaking. He knew things that I never did, things that he didn't want to face. But what? The book was still lying on the desk where he had left it, now covered in a messy layer of, well, him. I grabbed a nearby cloth and wiped it clean, trying my best to get all the pieces of brain and skull off. Ruins were emblazoned on the cover, some of them that I had never seen before. I opened the book and began reading. The pages were old and yellowed with spots here and there from where ink had been spilled into what I think was blood. There were illustrations of drifters making detailed notes of their anatomy and physiological traits. The next page showed the rune configurations as well as the carving for the ritual. I had just begun to flip through to another when there was a knock on the door. "Raleigh, what the hell happened here?" Gareth, our local doctor, was standing in the doorway, a handkerchief held over his face. He gazed around the room in horror before settling on Briggs' body. "Oh God, Briggs. You know anything about all this?" I asked him, drawing his eyes to the book. He shook his head, looking instead at the flintlock pistol still clutched in Briggs' hand. "So he did this to himself?" "Yeah, I told him about the drifter that just spoke while I was doing the ritual. He handed me this book and then blew his own brains out. I haven't seen anyone that terrified since, well, your brother." Gareth had finished my thought. "Go, Raleigh, I'll take care of this. I know this brings back painful memories for you." He moved from the doorway, revealing that Vale was standing behind him, still with a look of shock on her face. I snatched the book off the desk and walked briskly out, grabbing her arm and turning her from the grisly scene. There were tear tracks through the blood on her face. We walked in silence towards her home. When we finally reached it, I sent her inside to clean up, and I sat on the porch to look further into the book. The first half seemed to be all things that I already knew, about the ritual, the drifter's anatomy, a cipher of the ruins. But then something different caught my eye. It was another illustration, but this one was of a human. Multiple drawings of the same person, but with subtle changes between each one. Initially, it was a lengthening of nails and teeth, small gills growing in near the nape of the neck, and then the eyes turning. I don't know what they used to capture the color of the eyes in the illustration, but it was hauntingly lifelike. The next page held notes and more illustrations. Large ships at sea during a storm, being rocked by the waves. A figure standing in the water, towering above them. And then the ships being torn asunder by the wind and surf. One survivor of cargo ship Fate's Rest, a man by the name of William Stetler, noted that before the ship sank, he witnessed a looming giant on the horizon. I remembered my dream. The giant looming behind the waves of drifters, a general commanding his army. Stetler swears that he saw this figure smash these ships within its own hands, causing all on board to fall into the water. Here he says that they were set upon by people that looked just like them, save for a small bump in their foreheads and elongated claws and teeth. Statler says these figures would drag the surviving crew and passengers under the water, never to resurface. The book went on to explain how Statler had survived. He was knocked out by a plank of wood hitting him in the water and managed to wash up on the island, much like the drifters do. When the watchman on the shore at the time found him, he was almost cleansed with the ritual, only saved because his blood was red instead of blue. Safe to say this was a surprise for the watchmen. Statler joined the watch through marriage eventually, choosing to stay on the island instead of going back to his home on the mainland. He is responsible for one of the greatest breakthroughs in our understanding of the drifters. 10 years after the accident, and Statler was on duty keeping watch one morning, when a drifter washed in, he moved to retrieve it as he normally would, but he was frozen with fear upon looking at the face. Vale walked back outside, looking at me with concern as she wrung water from her hair. "What are we going to do?" she asked, sitting down next to me. I didn't answer, still reading and rereading the same sentence. Statler recognized his brother, Jacob Stetler, who had been last seen dragged under the surface 10 years previous. He hadn't aged, and the only difference was the small bump on his head. "Vale," I said, looking at her, "there are things that I'm still learning along with you, things that may cause me to falter in the coming days and weeks. I need you to promise me that if I hesitate, you will step in and finish the job." "I promise," Vale said, still looking concerned. "What's going to happen, Raleigh?" Just then somebody came running up the path, shouting my name. I recognized the same man that I had stationed at the shoreline, out of breath and wild-eyed. Please come quick, it's going into the village." He stopped in front of the house, panting and shaking. "Calm down, what the hell do you mean?" I asked, jumping from my chair. "And how did you know that I was here?" "Dr. Gareth told me that you were taking Vale home. I saw Briggs." He almost looked like he was going to vomit when he said it, thinking of the mess in Briggs' office. "A drifter washed up on shore. I saw it and started coming to get you, but then it spoke to me. It asked where you were, Raleigh." "Oh hell," I said, beginning to gather my things and start back toward the village. He stopped me again before I could walk off. "No, Raleigh, this one, it ain't like the others," he said, waving his hands frantically in front of him. "It's him, Raleigh. I don't know how, but it's him." Who is it?" Vale was shouting at him now, trying to make sense of this whole situation.
"River," the man whispered, looking down at the ground.
I stopped dead in my tracks. I couldn't move. There was no way that it could be him. He was gone, dead, his body was never found. This guy just didn't remember what he looked like. He was confused. "Who the hell is River?" Vale asked, getting impatient at the lack of answers. I turned to look at her, grabbing the rune-inscribed blade from my bag in the process. I handed it over to her. "You don't know the ritual yet, and I may not be able to see this one through," I said. "Will anyone please tell me what's going on? I can't help when I'm in the dark here." Vale was practically screaming now, tearing at her hair. "Who is River and why are you so worried about him?" I felt tears forming in my eyes as I looked at her. Hot bile burned in my throat and I almost choked on the words as they came up. "River was my brother." The silence smothered us as we walked back to the village square. I was beyond lost. It hit me when I read the book that something like this could be possible, but I didn't think it would happen this soon. Vale was certainly worried, shooting me looks of concern between looking down at the blade that I had given her. Finally, she spoke. "What do you mean that he was your brother? What happened?" I knew that she needed to know, knew that she was only asking so that she could be prepared. But I resented it all the same. I had grieved River since the day that I lost him, and it was only compounded by losing Dad days later. Did my dad know about this? Is that why he did what he did? "Makes sense you don't remember it. You would have been very young," I finally replied, the words sounding as if they were coming from somewhere far away. River was out with Dad and I one day keeping watch, and he was playing in the water while Dad and I were patrolling. He was there 1 second and gone the next. I don't know if it was the riptide or something else. He was just gone. "So you never found his body?" Vale whispered. I could feel the chill in her voice, and she realized where this was going. "That was 12 years ago, Vale. He was 6 years old, and we never found him." There was a noticeable shakiness in my voice as I started to say what I feared. Dad blamed himself, or maybe he knew the truth. Either way, he killed himself that night, walked right out to the beach, stood in the waves, and slashed his own throat. "Dear God," Vale let out a small gasp. I found him the next morning. The tide was going out when he did it, so he didn't wash away. He was just laying there in a tide pool of his own blood. My voice cracked remembering that day. I could still feel the cold rain stinging as it hit my skin, the wind scraping my face. Sitting in the pool of his blood and shaking him, hoping that he would wake up. I just sat there until I saw the drifter wash up, and then I had a duty, something that I was the only one fit for, only I could do until now. The village square was in sight now, and I could see a crowd of people gathered around, all holding on to each other and staring at something in the middle. I stopped in the path, causing Vale to almost run into me. She hefted the blade in its sheath and looked at me expectantly as I turned to her. "Remember what I told you. Step in if you falter." She nodded to me as she said it. If she was scared, she wasn't going to show it. Her gray eyes like the steel of the blade. She was well suited for this. "If I make any sign of weakness of not being able to do this, kill it," I said, reaffirming. "I can't promise that emotion won't get the better of me. If I move to stop you, then cut me down." "Raleigh." She looked shocked at this, but the resolve returned moments later. "Okay." We walked the remaining 100 yards or so into the square, the crowd parting as we came. As the last of them moved, I could see what they had been staring at. A boy no older than the day that he had disappeared is standing in the middle of the square. He had the signature bump of the drifters in pointed fingernails and teeth. Nothing had changed. He still had the short cropped haircut that Dad had given him just days before he disappeared, and I could see these small slits in his neck where gills had taken shape. He gave me a sharp smile as I approached. "You grew up," he said. His voice was more guttural than I remembered. The innocence of a child's voice was gone, replaced by menace and bloodlust. "I've missed you, big brother." "River," I replied simply. I could feel hot tears stinging my eyes. I knew that he was dangerous and that he could rip me to pieces in seconds if I let my guard down. It didn't change the fact that he was my brother once. He still looked like that 6-year-old boy that disappeared in the waves. "You don't seem as happy as I thought you would. I was hoping for more of a reunion," he replied. He looked around at the crowd that was still looking on, staring at him in horror. "What? I feel like you're all scared of me." "What happened to you, River?" I managed to choke out. I was showing weakness. No doubt he would try to take advantage of this. "The ocean takes us all eventually. Some of us earlier than others. You and Dad didn't keep your eyes on me, and now here I am. I've come back for you, though. I wanted to show you all the wonderful things that I've learned, all the amazing sights and feelings. They've taught me a lot in these few years that I've been gone." "Who?" I asked. "Oh, the others like me, of course. There are quite a few of us, as I'm sure you've noticed in the past few days. We've been busy, recruiting, creating, swelling our ranks. We bring more to him and he makes them like us. I'm sure that I can put in a good word for you all." "River, this isn't you." I was talking more to myself at this point than him. I didn't want to believe that this was what my brother had become. Didn't want to believe that he could be this monster. "You wouldn't know who I am," he roared, causing dark clouds to roll in and the wind to rise. I looked around, motioning everybody to stand back. I noticed then that Vale was no longer beside me. "Please, brother, don't do this. Come back to us. You don't have to be this way," I said to him, trying to look around for Vale without him noticing. I finally spotted her in the crowd of people, slowly moving away through the masses, trying to flank River. I had to keep him distracted. "There's no going back now. This island won't exist for much longer. All will be swallowed by the ocean soon enough. You'll all join us or drown. Some of you have a choice, some don't." He took a step forward, opening his arms toward me. "I wanted to bring you with me, Raleigh, to extend an offer. I can bring you with me and you can be made new, quick and painless." "I want to help you," I continued. Vale was almost behind him. Just another minute and she would be in place. "Oh, but I want to help you," River sneered back at me. Vale looked at me and nodded. "Now." I lunged forward at the same moment that she did, her with the blade drawn and me with my knife. All I could see before striking was River's twisted smile. Vale struck just right, stabbing right into his spine, and my knife found its mark in his throat, cutting any sound from him short. He managed to get 2 good swipes of his claws in, one striking Vale across the face and leaving 4 long jagged ravines of open flesh from her left eye down to her chin. The other hand managed to catch me in the stomach, knocking the wind from me and gouging into my flesh. I felt his hand tighten into a fist, closing around whatever internal organs he could. "Get some rope," I shouted at the onlookers. 2 of them ran toward the nearest building and found a halfway weaved fishing net that had been left there in the excitement of the day, throwing it to Vale and I. We quickly wrapped it around River, making sure that he was bound right before cutting a strip of fabric from my sleeve and stuffing it in his mouth. "There, no storms if he can't scream," I said, sitting back on the ground and clutching my stomach. I looked down to assess the damage and I could see heavy bleeding, as well as some of my insides where they shouldn't be. "Gareth, where's Gareth?" Vale ran to my side, taking off her coat and applying pressure to my stomach. Her eye was swollen shut at this point. She would be lucky to see out of it again. Vale, help him, please. I was gasping at this point. The adrenaline was wearing off and the pain was taking over. The last thing that I saw before passing out was Vale, tears mixing with the blood on her face, and River smiling at me on the ground. I'm awake again. It's been 2 days since we subdued River. Gareth patched me up the best that he could, but the diagnosis is grim. River managed to do some damage while he was in there. Vale told me that she has him locked away in Briggs's office, said that he's tied up in there smiling at anyone who comes by. Half of her face is covered in bandages. And Gareth said that her eye should heal, but she'll never regain 100% of her sight. I've been researching the book, she tells me. Says she learned the runes and memorized the ritual. She said there's also some talk of an older ritual, one talked about from long ago by long-gone ancestors. Something that may be able to stop all of this at once and for all. That god, I guess you could call it, Vale says. The giant that creates them. There's the thought here and there by whoever put this together. They translated from some ancient notes left behind by the first inhabitants of our island. Whoever wrote this thinks that if 2 sacrifices are made, then he can be weakened and bound under sea. She went on explaining this further, but I was drifting in and out from pain. Eventually, Gareth came back in and gave me a new dose of medicine. It didn't do much for the pain, but it sedated me. I'm in and out now. Vale is working on figuring out this ritual. If she can crack it, then we may just have a way to end all of this. I just hope that I'll live to see it. Hell came to our island. Death came to our island. It was beginning to get dark outside, and I was still recovering, hoping for the medicine that Gareth had given me to kick in soon so I didn't have to feel this throbbing pain nearly as much. I flipped through the book as I waited, the lamp beside me causing the pages to almost glow yellow. There were notes scribbled in the margins wherever they would fit, all in different handwriting. I had to wonder if these were written by cleansers before me. How old was this book? What happened to all of these people? If they had these notes and theories about the end, but still they couldn't bring it about, was there something that we weren't seeing in all of this? I flipped the page again and noticed that there were no notes scribbled for the first time in at least 100 pages. Instead, there was just one stanza of a poem, like a prophecy being laid out before me written in beautiful script. When waves ride high and oceans flood, rain and wind howl, filled with blood into the sea brothers of red and blue, ending water's wrath, beginning days anew. Holy shit, I said under my breath. This was it, this was the answer. This was how to stop everything. Raleigh, wake up! He stirred from the bed against the opposite wall, still in a drug stupor. And Gareth had said that his condition wasn't promising. When River plunged his hand in, he had severed quite a few of his intestines, causing massive internal bleeding. Gareth did as much as he could, but he wasn't outfitted for major surgery on this level. Raleigh turned to me, eyes barely open. Josephine? He mumbled, looking at me in surprise. Are you here to take me away? You've grown so much. No, Raleigh, it's me, Vale, I said. And Gareth had told me that he may hallucinate due to the medicine. I found it. I'm not ready, Josephine, he muttered back. Tears stung my eyes seeing this man broken. He had protected our island for so long, brought me under his wing without a question. I cried a little more as tears tracked their way across my still open wounds. There came a soft knock at the door as Gareth walked in, holding another vial of medicine and an armful of clean bandages. He looked at me as Raleigh muttered for Josephine once more. Poor man, he hasn't spoken about her in years, Gareth said. Who was Josephine? I asked him. He let out a sigh and sat next to the bed, beginning to dress Raleigh's wounds again. The only person that he ever loved, Gareth replied. Josephine was his daughter. Where is she now? Whatever heaven you believe. She only lived for an hour after birth. Passed away not long after her mother, he answered. I think that's why he took to you so well. You reminded him of what he lost. I couldn't hold it back any longer. Tears began to flow freely, stinging my wound even worse than before. I had no family. My mother had died during childbirth. My father killed not long after my conception. The village raised me, and Raleigh had always been there, offering advice or helping where he could. And now here he was, dying just a few feet away. Gareth finished wrapping the new bandages and stood up, handing me the vial. Give this to him when he wakes up, it'll help with the pain. He patted me on the shoulder as he began to walk out of the door. Raleigh stirred. Gareth, he muttered. Gareth, I need to go. He turned back around, looking to Raleigh. Rest, old friend. We'll be safe until you're ready, he said. As he opened the door to step outside, a scream pierced the air. Rising wind followed it within seconds. Help! Help me, please! Came a voice from somewhere outside. It began to scream again, but was cut off in a moment. Drag them to the waves, came another voice, this one guttural, like the sound of rocks scraping against the ocean floor. Bring them to Panthalacin, so he may shape them in his image. Ah, hell, Gareth said, stepping back inside and slamming the door. There's a horde of them out there. More screams cut through the air, causing the wind to strengthen once more. I could hear rain begin to pound on the roof of the small hut. The walls creaked as they were moved. Raleigh stirred yet again, suddenly more alert. What's happening? Where's the blade? He began to sit up and then screamed out in pain, falling back on the bed. Gareth, I have to get out there. Afraid I can't do that, brother. Gareth told him, pacing the room in thought. They've never come this far inland, other than river, of course. I don't like this. They'll find us soon enough. As if on cue, the door was kicked open and a towering drifter barged his way in, claws tearing at the doorframe. It screamed at the sight of them, bringing more heavy rain onto the hut. Back away, Gareth, I whispered, moving my hand down to the blade still sheathed at my side. He dove aside, leaving a straight path. I had to make sure that I was on target, even with my crippled eyesight. I drew the blade slowly, leaning forward and focusing on the diaphragm area, just like Raleigh had showed me that day on the beach. It ran forward, rushing at me with arms held high, claws brandished. I lunged forward, stabbing up toward it. I missed. It screamed in pain as the blade struck in the middle of the ribcage above the diaphragm. I heard the bone crack as it was cleaved in two. The drifter fell on top of me, teeth gnashing as it tried to recover. I moved my other hand to the hilt of the blade, grasping it and starting to saw downward. The drifter threw its head forward, attempting to bite down on my neck as I moved to the side under it, furiously working the blade lower. I heard the final gasp as I hit my target. The drifter collapsed, twitching. Gareth ran forward to help roll it off of me as I pulled the blade free, splattering blue blood on the walls. Val, are you okay? Raleigh asked, sitting up slowly this time so as to not hurt himself. He still winced in pain. Raleigh, thank God, I said, moving over to him. Look, I found how we can stop this. We have to get River. I grabbed the book from the table nearby, flipping to the poem. I shoved it toward Raleigh to read. Brothers of Red and Blue. That can't mean us, can it? He asked, looking up at me. I think so, I said. I could see the fear in his face. He was putting all of this together, the same puzzle that I had pieced together just hours ago. The wind was constant now, a continuous roar, a monster tearing the island apart. A board was torn from the roof, leaving an opening for rain to begin pouring through. "Help me up, Gareth," Raleigh said, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "We need to go get my brother." I hefted the blade, getting ready to make our run across the square. Gareth stood, holding Raleigh up on his shoulders. We exchanged a small nod before running out of the hut and into the chaos. The square was bathed in red. Drifters were dragging bodies out of homes, taking no care if they cut them open or not. Anyone that resisted was torn open, treated as a game by the attacking monsters. I could see one in the distance grabbing a woman away from her screaming wife, slashing her throat so blood covered the woman that she loved. It let out a demented laugh before lunging at the other woman. We made our way through, dodging what we could and trying to cut through what we couldn't. We finally reached the door of Briggs's office, busting in and charging through. River sat there in the center of the room staring toward us, a smile playing behind the gag over his mouth. "Grab and run," I said, looking towards Gareth and Raleigh. I took a hold of the chair that River was in and began dragging it out into the storm. We tried to go around the perimeter of the square and toward the path to the beach so as to not be seen. A drifter chased somebody out into our path, stopping us as it saw us. I charged forward, stabbing it through the eye this time. It fell to the ground shrieking, causing the storm to strengthen. When we finally made it to the path, I saw that we didn't have far to go. The amount of drifters congregating in the island and the chaos they were bringing had caused a storm to surge, bringing waves crashing just a few hundred yards away. The dunes were gone, and now the island just consisted of the square and surrounding area. "Oh, it's time, brother," River shouted over the chaos. I looked back to see that he had chewed through the gag, allowing him to talk once more. "There is our god waiting just as promised." I looked in the distance to see an inky silhouette on the horizon, moving ever closer to our position. With every stride it sent a towering wave toward us, taking more of the land for its own. Drifters were frothing in the waves, moving closer to the square. There had to be hundreds, all crashing on top of each other as they scrambled to be the first to the feeding. They stopped as they saw us. "Set me down," Raleigh said. Gareth gave him a look to confirm what he was asking, and then a small nod before setting him to his feet. Raleigh came over to me then, putting his hands on my shoulders. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that I'm proud of you," he said. He deftly slipped the blade away from me, hiding it in his coat pocket. "Well, brother, does your offer still stand? Will you take me to the sea?" "I thought you would never ask." River smiled, showing his sharp teeth. Raleigh walked over to him, holding his knife to the rope and snaring him. "I will let you free, but you must promise me that you will not harm them." Raleigh was wheezing with the effort of standing on his own. River simply nodded in return. With a quick flick of the knife, his restraints fell around him. They walked together toward the water, River shouting to the other drifters in victory. When they were waist deep, he turned to Raleigh. "And behold, Panthalacen." He motioned to the giant figure, features still obscured by the wind and rain that seemed to emanate from it. "The great sea, ruler of all beneath the waves, I bring you a sacrifice, the last of the cleansing line." He turned to face Raleigh, looking at him as he did the same. "I've waited so long, Raleigh." He thrust his hand forward, impaling Raleigh through the heart. He let out a gasp, leaning forward on his brother. River took him in a great hug, bringing him close. Raleigh wrapped his arms around him in return. "I as well," I heard him say. He flipped the blade from his pocket and held it to River's back, hugging him tight with one arm before thrusting towards himself. River let out a noise of surprise as he and Raleigh were joined by the blade. The drifters standing around began to scream and writhe, causing the wind to rise with them. Suddenly, they stopped. Gareth grabbed my arm and pulled me back, away from the water as we watched. The two brothers, their blood mixing on the blade and running into the water, seemed to melt away into a pool of red and blue. It only took moments for them to disappear completely, the color in the water branching out further toward the crowd of drifters. When they were touched by the blood, the drifters turned to water. With each new mass, a rising wave was formed, holding its place as a wall of water at the shoreline. I could almost make out the two brothers in the middle of it, still locked in their death embrace, translucent in their new state of being. When all the drifters had been reached, it was a towering tsunami standing at the ready. Panthalayson stood in the distance, the storm still swirling around him. He hefted his first, crashing it down into the water and sending his own wave forward. The great tsunami rushed to meet it, absorbing it as they collided. It picked up speed as it moved ever closer to the sea god, rolling with fury. There was a loud crash as it smashed into the giant, knocking him from his feet. I saw it try to get back up and regain its footing, but as it did, tendrils of water shot forward from the surface, ensnaring him at every possible point. Finally, two tendrils, one red and one blue, shot forward to wrap around the ancient neck of the sea, pulling it first to its knees and then under the surface forever. We've started taking count and burying our dead now. The island is destroyed, houses gone completely. It appeared as though we had suffered a direct hit from a hurricane. I was walking along the beach earlier when I spotted something shining in a tide pool. As I ran forward to look, I was able to make out the hilt of the time blade. The blade itself was broken, nothing but jagged splinters after a few inches, but I kept it anyway. It's to remember the father that I only had for a short time, the man who gave his life for us as long as he had lived. I know when the waves crash in, it's him telling me that he's still there, keeping the evil at bay in death as he did in life. Thank you, Raleigh. Today's episode is sponsored by Rocket Money. Smart money moves are all about getting more out of every dollar. With Rocket Money, you can easily find forgotten subscriptions and have them negotiate bills for you, putting money back into your pocket. With all those savings, Rocket Money practically pays for itself. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. The new Goals feature automatically saves money for you so you don't even have to think about it. Help pay off bills, put away money for a house, or just to build up your savings. Rocket Money makes it easy. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when they use all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Download the Rocket Money app and enter my show name, Creepscast, in the survey so that they know I sent you. Don't wait. Download the Rocket Money app today and tell them that you heard about them from my show. My best friend sent me a note before he passed away. When I read it and knew what it meant, I felt the need to vomit. And that's exactly what I did. Dear Peter, there are a lot of things that I want to say and not enough time to say them all. I wish that I had more time with you. How long has it been? 8 years since you left us. I know you said that you wouldn't come back here, and so far you've kept that promise. I hate that I'm going to make you break it, but you need to come back. There's something wrong here with the island itself. It's sick, Pete. The entire place is dying and nobody is willing to admit it. They keep sending out flyers and brochures encouraging tourists to take a picture of that dang canyon. But nobody seems willing to admit that something about that place is just wrong. You knew the truth, Peter. I think that's why you left. But you need to come home, please. This place needs you. I needed you. It's too late for me, though. Too late to stop what has happened. So don't do this for me. Do it for everyone else here. We need you, Peter. Sorry again for interrupting your life. Macy. I probably reread it 3 times, trying to convince myself that I was wrong about what it implied. But I've known Macy since grade school. This wasn't just a plea for help. This was a letter saying goodbye. I crumpled it up and then pulled up social media to confirm my fears. Macy had drowned the Sunday before. Nobody had bothered to even send me a notice of the funeral. That made sense though, considering that I haven't been home in a while. Macy was off by 2 years, I thought. This September marks a full decade since I had left the little fishing community of Gray Fork. I debated what to do next. I could have simply ignored her letter, kept living my own life here in Illinois, and not worrying about the life that I had back there. But her letter disturbed me because of its contents. The canyon. Most people don't know much about Gray Fork Island except one key detail that our councilmen have promoted like crazy since it happened. A large crater on the south side of the island is claimed to be the site of a UFO crash. Yep, you heard it right. UFOs, aliens, the whole 9 yards. Our community thrives off that nonsense, and it's done so for nearly 30 years. My grandfather, when he was still alive, said that the impact had occurred during the late 1910s. World War I was coming to a close and most people were so focused on the European scene that a strange event in Midwestern America was small news. According to him, an object was seen by local fishermen off the coast of Gray Fork on the evening of November 13th, 1919. It was said to be long and silvery and glowed brighter than a star. At a nearby military outpost, General George Aylesbury gave the order to shoot the object down. And that's exactly what happened, Grandpa said. The UFO was struck and crashed on the south side of the island, creating a canyon that is now affectionately called Colton's Crater. And Colton Ward was the first person on site to excavate the canyon, before the military swooped in and quarantined everything. Colton claimed that he saw 2 massive gray-skinned creatures emerge from the silver capsule. But then the army pulled him away and covered it all up. Or so the story goes. When the public was allowed access to the site again, almost 6 years later, there was no UFO or any evidence to suggest that anything had crashed there in the first place. Colton turned it into a tourist attraction, setting up a shop and a photo booth and even a restaurant. It stayed in business and kept Gray Fork afloat during the Great Depression and World War II. However, in the late 50s, astute miners realized quickly that the site was riddled with radioactive material. And because the contents of the crater were considered so dangerous, the south part of the island became no longer accessible to the public. Decades passed and no one knew the exact details, but eventually it was decided that the levels of contamination were not considered lethal, as long as nobody remained at the crater for a long time. And so the tourist trap was reopened, and Gray Fork flourished again. If I was a betting man, I would guess that palms were greased to get that legislation passed. I've only been around a short 35 years, but I know that money makes the world work. And I also knew that the radioactivity at Colton's Crater had claimed many lives, my father's included. 11 years ago, I saw my mother waste every dime she had, trying to prove that his work at the site had caused his death. It was for this reason I swore that I had to leave and never look back. I couldn't let my dad's death consume me like it had her. Now 10 years later, another death connected to that canyon. This time though, I couldn't just turn a blind eye. I checked my schedule and confirmed that I had the time to take off for the funeral, and then I booked a ferry to get to Grey Fork. I didn't pack a lot because I wasn't planning to stay there for long. I figured a day or two would sort things out, and maybe I could leave before anybody realized that I was even there. I guess that was a fantasy, because on the ferry I had the misfortune of running into an old friend, Philip West, former linebacker for the Grey Fork Guardians. He was also coming to the island for the funeral. "Never thought that I would see you here, Pete. I thought you were gone for good," he told me. "It's personal. Macy and I were best friends," I said as I looked toward the foggy shores of the small island. It looked so desolate. "Is that what she told you?" Philip said with a mild laugh. And then he showed me a letter that he got from Macy. It was identical to the note that I had received. I took it, trying to not feel surprised, and then I looked toward the shore again. Had Macy tricked me to get me back on this miserable rock? If that was the case, my stay might be even shorter than I had expected. I thought sourly as I passed Philip the note back. When I got it in the mail, I found the whole thing quite odd. I haven't spoken to her in years. I left Grey Fork to have a better life, and I've had that good life. I got a wife and kids and a nice paying job. This place hasn't even crossed my mind. Macy's note was a shock to the system. How did she even find my address? And why was she asking me to come back to this dumb old island to investigate a strange canyon? Makes no sense, honestly, he told me. I hated to admit that I hadn't considered all of this before I left home. Philip was coming here to get answers, and I considered asking him if we should work together. But I never did get along with him, and I wasn't planning on making amends now. So I kept my mouth shut as the boat approached the docks, and the air horn announced that we were free to leave. As I grabbed my bags, it began to rain, soaking my body as I ran out toward the bus stop. Grey Fork only had 2 bus lines 10 years ago, and from the look of things, not much had changed. I stood there in the storm debating if I wanted to ride a bus alongside Philip West. And then I saw a man holding a placard with my name on it, standing next to a black Honda SUV. I couldn't help but walk over to him, surprised that anybody would be expecting my arrival. He opened the door to the car, and I found myself staring at the current owner of Colton Canyon and one of my old girlfriends, Jennifer Ward. "Get in, Pete. We need to talk," she said. I didn't argue. I was mystified as to how she knew that I would be here, but it didn't take long for her to reveal what was going on. "I see that you got Macy's letter. I got one too, by the way. Everyone that knew her did, urging us to come here to Grey Fork and check out what happened in that canyon," Jen told me as we drove away from the docks. "Everyone? How many letters did you send?" I asked. "Over the years, a lot of people have left this island. I think if I'm counting you, I found 6 people so far that came back because Macy wrote them a note and begged them to come home," Jen told me. I said nothing as the storm got worse, and we drove up toward the old bed and breakfast that her family ran. Jen told me she had a room for me and anybody else that had gotten a note from Macy. "I'm determined to learn the truth about my family's old stomping grounds," Jen told me. "Old? Do you mean the Wards don't have control over the canyon anymore?" I asked as we pulled to the side of the building, and Jen offered me an umbrella. "My father lost it in a gambling ring 2 years ago. Fool. This place was keeping us from going bankrupt. Now the new manager has let me stay on as a housekeeper until the debt my father paid is gone. But that isn't your problem, Peter. Just get some rest. We will talk tomorrow and maybe all of us can get to the bottom of this, Jen told me. As I went upstairs to try and relax from my long trip, my mind kept spinning about the strange notes that Macy sent. When I first saw it, I had assumed it was a personal plea to make me come to the island and solve the mystery of the canyon. But now I was beginning to realize that it wasn't as close to her as I thought. Why had she brought so many of her old friends here? And how did it connect to the canyon that the Wards had used as a tourist trap for decades now? As I settled into my room, I looked out the window toward the south end of Gray Fork. The long, thin canyon stretched into complete darkness, like a wound that would never heal. Something strange was happening deep in its crevices, and I needed to figure out what. I didn't believe in extraterrestrial life, but I was convinced this was not a natural phenomenon happening here. Aliens or not, I would find the truth. If not for Macy, then for my own sanity. I told myself for years that Gray Fork was nothing but a bad memory that I needed to run away from. I told myself that my father's death was just his own fault, and that my leaving was for the best. I had to be right about this, or the last 10 years would be for nothing. The funeral home was located near the middle of the island, an old stone structure that probably dated back to colonial times. Jen promised that we would talk after the services, but honestly, my mind was on seeing my family there at the church. I hadn't said anything to any of them about my return, so when my mom caught my attention across the pews, I knew that this trip was a mistake. I tried my best to get lost in the crowd, but Mom found me as soon as the service had ended. "You have some nerve showing up here," she shouted and pointed a finger straight at my face. She looked terrible and smelled of booze. "Lower your voice," I told her as I saw townspeople give us odd looks. "I don't see why I should. You come here to your friend's funeral, but you didn't even bother to help bury your own father. Can we go somewhere and talk about this?" I pulled her toward the entrance of the church. Philip had heard our exchange and thought that he was going to be a gallant knight. "Mrs. Thorne, is Pete bothering you?" "Stay out of this," I told him. There were words exchanged that I can't repeat, and then he hit me. My mother stopped the fight from getting worse and told me to come to her house. I had a bloody, broken nose to mend, so I didn't argue. When we got there, she nursed my wound with weary, drunken eyes, seemingly lost between joy and anger to see me again. "You shouldn't have come back here," she told me. "Yeah, I'm starting to realize that," I told her as I took an ice pack to my throbbing head. I told her about the note that Macy had sent and the other ones who had received it. Her face went pale when I mentioned the canyon. "You can't go down there. There's evil in that place. It killed your father," she muttered. I wasn't sure I believed her, but I urged her to tell me what had happened 10 years ago. As much as she didn't want to, I convinced her that I wouldn't go to the crash site if she told me. "It was a bad winter. Your dad had just lost a job with the lumber company over on the west side of the island. Even though he had been almost 20 years, it meant nothing to them. Times were tough and the money on Gray Fork was drying up. The only business that seemed to have stood the test of time was that canyon. Howard Ward still owned it back then, and he gladly let your dad come aboard as a supervisor. They needed people willing to take groups deeper into the canyons. Thrill seekers, everyone was trying to prove that the aliens were there. It was a bunch of nonsense. I thought that, and your dad felt the same. As long as it gave us a way to keep a roof over your head. After those first few weeks of work, though, your dad began to act strangely. He would put in extra shifts, trying to find large groups to take into the canyon. And he would never explain what exactly they saw down there, but His face told me everything. There are secrets buried in there, Peter, and your dad let it eat him alive. I later found out that a lot of the people that he took on these tours never left the island, or at least there's no document of their departure. She showed me articles that had paperwork from Colton's Canyon. She had been collecting them for what purpose I wasn't sure. There were discrepancies where some of the information didn't match what Dad had put down. It was like they were keeping two sets of books. You're saying these people disappeared in the mine? I asked. Something happened to them. Why is there no record of them leaving Grey Fork? She asked. I shook my head, not wanting to believe such a tall tale. There are a lot of people here, Mom. You can't hide this, not for this long, I told her. She seemed angry that I didn't believe her and went to her attic to retrieve one final item, a journal that Dad kept, which she claimed held the truth about the caves. I looked through the journal. Most of it was just ramblings and thoughts of Dad trying to figure out more about the canyon. Reading this showed that he was losing his grip on reality near the end. The guilt of what he did to those people. It killed him, Mom said. Sure enough, as I reached the end of the journal, I saw that his ramblings became nothing but gibberish, along with weird drawings that reminded me of what the old tales said the aliens looked like. When did you find all this? I whispered. 5 years back. It took me a lot to get Howard to cough it up, but I think he realized the cave was evil as well. I think he lost the rights to the canyon on purpose. Otherwise, if he had stayed owner, I think he would have eaten a bullet too. That night, I reviewed Dad's journal, writing down what little I could make sense of. There were charts and geological surveys amid notes relating to the military outpost on the east side of Grey Fork. From what I was reading, Howard Ward had an arrangement with the army to maintain the site and continue the tours despite the dangers of radiation. If this was true, the army was knowingly sending people down there. But why? What did they hope to accomplish? I knew the answers had to be in the canyon. I gave Jen a call in the morning and asked where her father was these days. Oh, Dad, he's at the local psych ward at Morning View. He lost his marbles after he lost the business, she told me. I thanked Mom for all her help and hurried to the psych hospital. I had only a day left on Grey Fork and I was determined to make the most of it, learning what I could about this half-century mystery. My initial speculation was the army was hiding some kind of experimental weapon down in the cave. But when I met Howard Ward, everything changed. On the drive up to the hospital, I came up with a good lie about why I was there. Jennifer had sent me there and I was a family lawyer. There were documents that needed to be finalized for the canyon that he had failed to take care of 2 years prior. It was good enough to not raise any eyebrows for the staff, but when Mr. Ward met me in the commons room, he wasn't fooled. "You ain't my family lawyer," he muttered as I closed the door. "You dated my Jenny, I remember you. And before you call your nurse to shove me out the door, you should take a look at this," I told him. I gave him Macy's note first, and then my father's journal. "What is this supposed to mean to me?" Howard snarled. "Notice anything? The writing here is the same. For almost a decade now, people have thought that my father died a madman, and then I thought the same thing about my closest friend. But that was just part of the cover-up, wasn't it, Mr. Ward?" I asked. He diverted his eyes, which told me that I was onto something. My mother believed that the people being sent to that crash site were being killed. What was really happening to them? I asked. "Why don't you go down there and find out for yourself?" he asked. Well, I plan to do that next, once I find a way. From what I hear, the new owner has the same sweet deal that you had with the army. You knew that those people were being used for some ghastly exploitation, didn't you? I asked. He shook his head and he looked toward the window. You understand nothing, boy. You think this is the army. You are so small-minded. This is much bigger than anything this planet is ready for, he whispered. Aliens? You expect me to believe that aliens are behind this? I asked. I saw them, Peter. Tall, gray-skinned beings with eyes of fire. They spoke to my very soul, twisted my mind. They controlled me. They've been controlling me all along. They are the ones that brought you back to this island, he whispered. My mouth felt dry as he finished speaking. It sounded absurd. What would extraterrestrials want with somebody like me? Or Philip or Jen? Why were they gathering us? Tell me the truth, Mr. Ward. Did you kill those people? I asked. Instead of responding, he began to smash his head against the wall, and I shouted for a nurse. By the time that they had arrived, he had fallen unconscious. I quickly gathered what I had brought and made a phone call to Jen to meet me near the canyon. I think I have an idea about the canyon. Can you get the others to come? I asked her. Everyone except Philip is here. He went to Macy's gravesite, she told me. I told her to meet me around noon and then pulled up alongside the small cemetery. Just as Jen said, Philip was there looking down at the grave. What do you want, Pete? He snapped as soon as he saw me. Jennifer told me that you were here. I want to make amends, I lied. I needed him to come to the canyon too because he had received a letter from Macy. That meant that he was connected to all of this somehow. It looks like your mom stitched you up. Guess I went a little too hard, he said with a shrug. What brings you back here? I asked, gesturing toward the grave. I think we are all asking that. Jen told me that others got the same letter from Macy. It feels like we've been guided here for a purpose, and I wish I knew why, Philip admitted. I did my best to not let him know that I felt the same, but offered some encouragement to get him on my side. The answers are in that canyon. Jen is getting the others to come there this afternoon. You should come too. I think the only way that we can learn what is happening is if we go together, I told him. West shrugged and nodded, walking to the rental car that he's got. I'll come. But if it turns out to be another waste of time, Pete, I'll knock you down again. As he drove off, I scratched the back of my head and wondered what he meant. What moment in our past did he consider a waste? I checked the time and went to get my things before driving toward the canyon. My hope was to resolve this mystery and be on the evening ferry to the mainland, but that never happened. As I arrived, I saw that the old buildings used for ticket sales and memorabilia looked like they were about to fall apart. The new owner must not be trying to keep it looking fresh, I realized. I saw everyone gathered next to the building. Jen didn't seem amused that we were all summoned here. What did you call us here for, Pete? She asked. The tour only works if we get a whole group. We go down together and get the truth. It's that simple, I told her. That was another lie. I didn't want to admit it, but ever since I had arrived, I had been telling such lies to the people closest to me. I wanted to know what this canyon was hiding, and I was willing to do whatever it took to find out, even if it meant that these people might get hurt in the process. I didn't know for sure that we would be safe, but I had to keep pushing forward. The tour guide was an older gentleman, probably not connected to the new owner at all. Much like my father, just another clueless local trying to make ends meet. They asked us all for our driver's licenses. They seemed happy to see that all of us were locals. I hadn't really checked to make sure about that, but I found the information odd. So many people have tried to leave Grey Fork over the years, and now something has drawn us back. Howard Ward believed it was extraterrestrial in origin. My mother believed that it had something to do with the government. I wasn't sure what to think anymore as we all boarded a cart and our guide took us into the canyon. Despite the fact that it was a clear day, once we were deep enough, the rock walls prevented any light from shining down. It occurred to me that even though this place had such an impact on my life, this was my first time coming here. Maybe I always knew that it was trouble, I thought. As we drove, the guide mumbled the same old legend that all of us had heard before. Of course, they didn't mention the radiation poisoning that nearly closed the place down for good, but I decided to push my luck and ask, "Are people still getting sick? Is it really safe to come down here? Why did they close this place for so long?" I asked. The guide gave me a cold glare as we got toward the deeper parts of the cave, apparently not expecting somebody to know that part of the story. "Oh, this place has never done anything like that. It's only bogus rumors. It heals people. You'll see soon enough." He parked and urged us all to follow deeper. The path led underground. All of us were silent as we walked into the cave, and I asked Jen if she had ever come down here before. My dad said I couldn't. He said he didn't want me to wind up like the people that he sent down here. That made my stomach do flips as I asked the others the same thing, and I soon learned that none of us had ever been down to this canyon before. But all of us grew up here, and we knew about this place. So why did we never come? I asked out loud. As if to answer my question, the guy punched a key code into a door in front of us and told us all to enter a very dark and very cold room. But I saw something glowing inside. Mesmerized by it, I walked into the room and stared up at what looked like a glowing green stone. It had to be at least the size of a small car. It had markings all across its exterior, but none of them resembled any human language that I understood. I couldn't help but feel my heart skip a beat. So it really was aliens this whole time? I asked in amazement. The guide laughed and remarked, "This is just a meteorite. Nothing special here. But I'm not surprised you've heard the rumors about the aliens. It's kind of our spill to sell tickets." "Oh, what are these markings then?" Philip asked as he tried to reach out and touch the stone. Before he got too close, he jolted back. It feels like the thing's on fire." "That beats me if I know, I just work here," the guide said and encouraged everyone to take as many pictures as we wanted. "You'll see your equipment doesn't work down here anyway. People enjoy that part of the phenomenon," he remarked. I pulled Jen and Philip to the side, whispering in their ears, "We need to find a way to go deeper. Something tells me that this guide is only telling us half the story." "Now let me see what I can do," Jen said with a wink and strolled over to the guide to start flirting with him. I was amazed at how she was able to trick him. It was like flipping a switch. "It makes you feel like you're back in high school," Philip said, nudging me with a laugh. A few moments later, after bribing the guide, he let us be alone with the stone. "How much time do we have?" I asked. "As much as we want, I guess. That old dude didn't know anything, and I'm starting to think that there's nothing here," Jen said with a sigh. I suggested that we needed to check the rest of the cave and make sure that there weren't any secret passageways. This couldn't possibly be all that was hidden here, I thought as we spread out to the crevices in the room. As we looked around, I noticed other markings that matched the glowing stone near the base of the floor. The entire room, as a matter of fact, seemed to be somehow connected in some way. It made me wonder if when the guy brought us inside, if we had stepped inside as something. "There's something here." One of the people shouted, pointing near some kind of pedestal. It was large enough for them to stand on. As we cleared away other debris, I realized that there were more similar items on the floor. Each resembled a standing circle that was big enough to remain perfectly still on. As Jen stepped on one of them, the stone sunk into the floor and gave off a glow just like the central orb. There are enough pedestals here that all of us can stand on them. In fact, I think it's the exact number of people in this room, Philip commented. We took a closer look and determined that he was right. Maybe something happens when we step on them all together, I guessed. Immediately the others wanted to give it a try. I was the last to stand on a pedestal, and as I did it, I immediately felt unsettled in my body. The room was colder and more claustrophobic, darker. Something's off, Jen said. The others were already standing on the pedestals, preventing us from stopping what we had set into motion. The stone in the middle of the room began to glow ever brighter, and I felt my body become heavy. And then we started to float. Peter, what the heck is happening? Jennifer shouted. I'm not sure. Try to push yourself to the door, I told her. As soon as I had uttered those words, I saw that the door was beginning to shut behind a wall of stone. We were trapped in this room and it felt like I was beginning to suffocate. The stone began to spin and its glow blinded my vision. I could feel my skin begin to blister and burn, cracking across my arms and turning my pigment a dull gray. Just as suddenly as it had begun, we fell back down to the ground in the room, all of us gasping and breathing and feeling the need to throw up. What the heck just happened? Philip asked. None of us had the answer. I noticed that the stone was still spinning. I don't think we're out of the woods just yet, I said. Near where the door had been, I heard voices and saw people that looked like miners entering the cave. My arms felt too heavy to lift, but I tried to get their attention. One of them raised a gun to Philip and ordered him to stand down. I soon realized that these were army officers, likely coming to investigate what had happened. I raised my hands over my head, my vision adjusting to the room. And that was when I saw Jennifer. Her body was dull and devoid of color, her skin cracked and brittle like rocks. I looked down at my own body and realized the same thing had happened to me. Something in this room had transformed us. The soldiers kept shouting orders as we tried to stand. No, stop, we need your help. Philip pleaded as one of the officers kicked him back on the ground. It was as though they didn't understand what we were saying. And then they used the blunt end of a rifle and knocked him unconscious. I was next. I found myself struggling to even fight back. The world around me went black before I could even scream. We woke up chained to metal tables. It took me a moment to realize that we were no longer in the canyon. I couldn't shout to the others or check to see if they were all right. As I focused on the objects in the room, I saw a calendar near the door. October 1976. That couldn't possibly be accurate, I thought, as I heard voices outside of where they were holding us. The military officials had returned. A man in his late 50s entered the room and noticed that I was awake. Water? He offered, uncapping a bottle. You've made a mistake. We're just civilians. We live here on Grey Fork, I told him. Son, I know exactly who you are. I've been expecting this day for nearly 70 years, he commented. I got a good look at him, trying to figure out if he was bluffing or just insane. You don't look a day over 55, and that would be pushing it. What's going on here? Are you involved in this cover-up at Colton's Canyon? I asked. You ask a lot of questions. Colton's has been closed for years now. In fact, we were waiting for your arrival to reopen the place. he said as he sipped his water and walked toward the next table. The person there thrashed and tried to fight back as the officer took a syringe and plunged it into their chest. "You have no idea what you are, now do you, son?" he asked. He turned around and showed me that he had extracted a vial of blood from them. It gave off the same bright light as the stone in the canyon. "I know that you're violating human rights. I have a lawyer back in Illinois," I snapped. "Your lawyer hasn't even been born yet. You think I'm joking?" The man said and turned to a monitor, flipping it on to show the newscast. "This is 1976? You know that we're from the future. Who are you?" It felt as though my brain was overwhelmed with this information, as he took my blood as well and smiled. "I'm here to make sure that you fulfill your destiny." As he left, I turned to the other person, wishing that I could find a way to break our bonds. None of this made any sense, but I was determined to help us escape. A few hours later, masked techs arrived and began to pump drugs into the other prisoner. The army guy stood by watching and wrote reports as the test continued. My friend writhed in pain at first, but then it became so overwhelming that they just laid there and let them do the tests. "What are you trying to accomplish?" I asked the army officer. "The 8 of you come from the year 2023. That's almost 50 years ahead in our time. Yet you have traveled backwards in time, and your physical body will continue to reverse in the timeline the longer that you stay here. Such an ability is remarkable and worth studying. It could easily help the entire human race to fight old age," he explained. "So, we're just your guinea pigs," I shouted in anger. 70 years ago, you appeared in the canyon like a fire descending from heaven. You had nearly lost all sense of humanity, but after we procured your corpses from the UFO, we discovered the truth. Despite your alien exterior, your cellular structure was still human. We've been studying it ever since. I'm living proof that the treatment can work. I should be dead by now, but your blood has kept me alive." Even as he finished the sentence, he used the old vial of blood on himself, smiling mercilessly as we were poked and prodded. "So yeah, you'll be my test subjects as long as possible. It's for the betterment of mankind, you know." He laughed. Something deep inside of me became so angry, I started to feel like I did in the cave, my skin blistering and burning. Suddenly, I was able to break free from my bonds. The tech nearby tried to sedate me, but I subdued them as well, and then freed the other man alongside me. "We need to find the others," I said, my body feeling light as a feather as I searched the outer hallway. The nearby rooms had our friends in them, and as I started to use my newfound strength to bust their doors open, I found that some of them hardly even looked human anymore. I stepped into the next experiment chamber where Philip was thrashing around on the floor like an animal. His body was elongated like a snake, his skin stretched beyond measure, and his eyes bulged as he struggled to breathe. I realized in that horrible moment where the stories of the gray aliens were coming from. They were turning people just like us into these monsters. I realized as Philip tried to reach out in desperation toward me. I knew that I couldn't help him. I sealed the door shut and told the others to make sure that we didn't open it. "We're running out of time. We need to find a way out of here," Jennifer said as she joined us. It looked like the mutations hadn't affected her as greatly, but she was still struggling. Deep scars in her face resembled gills, and I wondered if we would ever even be able to breathe oxygen again once the transformation was complete. Jennifer saw the end results of Philip and did her best to not panic, shouting orders to the others as we moved to the second floor of this prison. Just as we got to the top of the steps, I heard the door that we had sealed fall apart. It sounded like a bomb going off. Philip was following and he was angry, screaming and attacking everyone that he got close to. In front of us, soldiers attempted to barricade our escape, and I found myself acting like my friend. Whatever they had done to us gave us extraordinary strength, tossing them aside like rag dolls. As we reached the outside of our prison, I found myself unable to move because of the brilliance of the sun. Jennifer shrieked and fell to the ground, her eyes no longer able to handle the light. Soldiers surrounded us, and I thought for sure that our escape was in vain. The officer that had first found us approached me, a smile appearing on his face. "Amazing. You're just like the aliens that I met 70 years ago. You're a miracle, the next stage of human evolution," he commented. He ordered us to be taken to the crystal chamber. Despite our effort to fight back, we were escorted into a boat and soon found ourselves being transported to Grey Fork, to the canyon. "I can't believe this is happening. Why is this happening?" I whispered as I watched the waves of the lake crash against the boat. As we reached the canyon, the soldiers led us through a different passageway. This one was littered with corpses, gray-skinned aliens that looked like they had become a part of the cave wall. Except I understood how these creatures were once human like us, taken from our present, brought here to this cruel past to be experimented on. We've been manipulated since the start, I thought as we were forced into the crystal room again. Despite the fact that we were missing Philip, our bodies began to experience the same symptoms as before. I prayed for unconsciousness. The room around us began to glow and shimmer, and we were again hurtled into an unknown space. This one looked much different than before. The cave almost resembled a control room. I stumbled over to one of the monitors to get an idea of where we were, but the readings made no sense. If I was reading it correctly, we were flying above the surface of the earth. An alarm blared near the crystal. Jennifer reached for it with her bony hands and activated a communications device. "Unidentified aircraft, this is General George Aylesbury. Stand down or be fired upon," a voice shouted. "Oh, no, God, no. I think they're going to shoot us down," Jennifer said. My head was spinning, but I knew what was happening, even as the monitors told us that missiles were firing upon us. We had been thrust into the distant past, where the UFO had first crashed onto Grey Fork. Except we were the ones piloting the ship that was about to crash. The ship began to go up in flames as the missiles struck us, and I held on to whatever I could. The massive metallic ship hurtling toward the surface. Rocks and glass and debris crashed all around us as we hit the ground. The merciful darkness my only comfort as I became pinned under the rubble. I'm not sure how long I stayed there. When I heard voices approach, I saw army officers shooting at my friends, killing them without even realizing that they were hurting their fellow man. I found the strength to shout to them, and the officers hesitated when my voice sounded human. They instead stunned me and removed me from the rubble, dragging me to a transport that would take me away from the canyon. As I left the control room that was now buried in the cave, I apologized to Jennifer, hearing her ragged voice beg for death as I was taken away. Approximately 30 minutes later, I was in chains before the same man that I had seen in the 70s, except he looked slightly younger. "You speak our language?" Aylesbury asked as several of his doctors took samples of my blood. "I am from the future. I'm a human just like you," I told him weakly. "A human? That's not possible. Such a wild claim would require evidence," he commented. I used the only idea that I had available and gave him a few details of the coming years, including what would happen here on Grey Fork. The general rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Amazing. Such technology is beyond even our wildest dreams. I'm sorry to say this, but you'll have to stay here and be monitored. We need to know everything that we can about this UFO and the powers that it gave you, Aylesbury ordered. Should we put him with the other? An officer asked. The general gave a nod and I was dragged back to the barracks. Once in my cell, I took the time to mourn my friends. Jennifer, Philip, and the others were dead, all because of my actions. I thought as I looked across the room and saw another figure there in the shadows. The figure looked familiar but different. I took a step closer and I called out to them. And then I heard a voice that I knew I couldn't mistake. "Peter, you got my letter," the voice said. "Macy? What have they done to you?" I said as I saw her body. We both were no longer the people that we had once been. "Nothing that I didn't want to happen. I knew that you would be here eventually. It was fate," Macy said wistfully. "The others are dead, Macy," I told her. She didn't seem fazed by this news, her dark eyes glistening like stars. "In the times that we come from, I went to the canyon like so many had before us. I wanted to learn what secrets it held, and I was thrust into the past just like you. They tortured me, experimented on me, and did unspeakable things to me that no human should endure. And then it occurred to me that I was no longer human. The stone, the ship, it had changed me. Powers beyond our understanding have manipulated time and space for us to be a part of their plan, and I at least understood why when the stone spoke to me, sending me here to the distant past," Macy whispered. I got closer to her, trying to understand what she was saying. It sounded like madness, but I had already experienced so much that I knew that it had to be true. "The stone, is that the real alien life form?" I guessed. "It's been altering our body for a purpose, Peter. And don't you see it? We are ushering in the next chapter of humanity. Our planet will be forever changed thanks to what they have done to us," she told me. "You mean the stone tricked us, sending us back into the past because it knew that these soldiers would use us as guinea pigs," I realized. "You saw the corpses in the canyon, more fodder for its endless hunger, Peter. We are simply slaves to it now. The soldiers are no different even if they don't realize it. Their thoughts and actions are all being driven by their greed and desire for power. Power that the life form will never give them," she told me. I found myself unable to stand, the overwhelming meaninglessness of my life crushing me as I shook and cried. I had tried so hard to escape from Grey Fork, but it had always been a part of me. Everyone and everything I ever knew was just a cog in the machine of a power beyond my imagination. Now my only hope was death one day, either at the hands of the soldiers or the alien that had changed my body and made me in its image. "How long will we be here, Macy?" I asked. My friend made a shriek but didn't move. She had resigned herself to this fate as well. "Forever. I think we're trapped here as long as we live, and even if we die, we become a part of the living ship that altered our bodies. This island, all of this, we are all fuel to its appetite," she whispered. I wanted to cry and to laugh, but the only response that I really had was anger. That anger led to silence over the years, as these soldiers used us again and again to experiment on themselves, unaware that they were being used by the very ship that had crashed so long ago. Eventually, I knew that I would become a part of the ship too, like so many others. My only passion over the years became writing this account, hiding it from sight and storing it for the future. One day, far from now, perhaps in the time that I came from, somebody will find this account and learn the truth about Grey Fork. There are aliens here, and we are the monsters that have made this hell. On the night of January 25th, 1980, the temperature on Nantucket Island, Massachusetts dropped below freezing. It was so frigid that it was almost unbearable to so much as step outside without a thick, heavy-duty coat and ski mask on. The wind whipping in from the Atlantic dropped the temperature even further, and the waves crashed against the shore with all the fury of Mother Nature herself. It's a night that old islanders remember well, because it was the night that Margaret Kilcoyne disappeared without a trace. An assistant professor of medicine from Columbia College in New York, she flew to the island a few days prior and was last seen dining with her brother and 2 friends, before retiring to her home in Tom Nevers for the night. The next morning, her brother had reported her missing. There were no footprints showing her leaving at all, no trail to mark her having gone anywhere. There was a huge search and rescue mission launched for her. Coast Guard choppers flew overhead, and teams of local and state police, along with island firefighters, combed the beaches, swamps, and woods for her. But she was never found, and the authorities told the press that nobody knew what had happened to her. Why am I telling you all of this? Because it was a lie. They know well what happened to her, and she wasn't the only one to disappear either, and it's time that the truth was told. I was a young man back then, only just having turned 28, having graduated from the police academy and served in the Boston Police Department for 4 years. I grew tired of the hustle and bustle of city life, as well as admittedly disillusioned by the senseless violence that I saw others inflict upon each other for drugs, money, or just for kicks. So I applied to the Nantucket Sheriff's Department in February of 1978. I was accepted, and I quickly moved to the island, which lay 30 miles off the shore of Cape Cod. For almost 2 years it was quiet. Lifelong residents welcomed me, though always kept me slightly out of reach due to being an outsider. It was something that I honestly didn't mind in exchange for peace and quiet. Island life was slow and predictable, and aside from calls about public drunkenness and dumb teenagers, there were no serious incidents. That was until the night of January 15th, 1980. I had just gotten on duty and sat down at my desk to take over on the night shift when the sheriff came striding out of his office behind me, a slightly worried look on his face. "Vincent, come with me," he said simply, and then turned to the other deputy locking up his desk for the night. "Johnson, you're gonna have to do some overtime work tonight. Stay here until we get back." I heard Johnson let out a weak cry of protest, but I was already moving for the door, grabbing my coat and following the sheriff out of it. The night was as cold as a witch's tit, and a light rain had begun falling. "You drive," he told me, tossing me the keys to a Dodge Ram Charger that served as one of the 2 Sheriff's Department cruisers. Slipping behind the wheel, I started the truck and pulled out onto the road. "Where are we going?" I asked the silent shape in the passenger seat after a moment. "We're going to Sconset. The chief of police asked for our assistance over there," he said, reaching down and hitting the switch for the lights, which bathed the world around us in a swirling glow of red and blue. Sconset was a small village at the easternmost point of the island. I frowned. In all my time here, the local police have always been able to handle the cases that came their way on their own. What's so bad that the chief had called us in? A small pit had begun to settle itself in my stomach, and it grew heavier as my unasked question was answered. "Brian Mays is missing." I tore my eyes from the flicking windshield wipers and dark road in front of me to shoot the sheriff a look. Catching my gaze, he slowly nodded. His usually light eyes now looked sharp and alert. Not saying another word, he turned back to stare out into the night. I did the same as my thoughts began to race anew. Brian was a fisherman, somebody who I had always been friendly with when we ended up being called down to the docks. A hulking but quiet man in his mid-40s, he lived with his wife in a 1-bedroom cabin near the water's edge. As far as I knew, he had no disagreements with any other locals, or drank enough to wander off in an inebriated stupor. The fact that the sheriff had deliberately used the word missing troubled me, though I didn't know why. 20 minutes later, we turned onto the sandy road that served as the maze driveway. 2 police cars already sat out in front of the house. I could see Mrs. Mays talking with the chief of police. She looked almost inconsolable. Parking the truck and getting out, he broke away, leaving her in the care of one of his officers while he strode over to us. "Lewis, it's good to see you," he said, reaching out and shaking the sheriff's hand before sighing. "Though I wish it were under better circumstances." The sheriff nodded. "Yeah, the feeling's mutual," he replied. The chief turned and looked at me, nodding. Deputy Codas, good to see you again, son." I nodded back. "Sir." The sheriff cleared his throat, signaling pleasantries had ended. "What have you got?" The chief turned and gestured towards the house. "We got a call about 45 minutes ago. Annette said that she had woken up around 11:30 due to a severe chill in the house and discovered that Brian was not in bed with her. She got up to try and find him and discovered the back door out to the beach standing wide open. She tried searching and calling for him for 15 minutes before calling us." He turned to me. "I understand you used to work in the city and you were pretty good at helping detectives track down missing people. Deputy, is that correct?" I nodded, feeling my professional mind kick into gear, something that I hadn't had to use since moving here. "Yes, sir, I was," I answered simply. He nodded, seeming somewhat relieved, and then gestured toward the open front door of the house. "Please, go join my officers inside. See if there's anything that we might have missed, because we can't spot a trace of where he could have gone. I'm gonna speak to the sheriff for a few more minutes." I nodded again and then turned away and strode towards the house. And behind me I could hear the 2 men begin talking fast in hushed tones, but I was already slipping into the old skin that I had to wear back in Boston, detached and clinical. Stepping inside, I shivered slightly. The frigid air had invaded every inch of the house's interior, the warmth that it once held long since stripped away. The lights were on, meaning that I didn't have to pull my flashlight from my service belt. 3 local officers stood in the tiny living room, conversing quietly with one another. They turned to look at me as I entered. "You must be Deputy Codas." The first, a tall, clean-cut man whose name tag stated his name was Holiday, spoke. "That'd be me," I answered, offering my hand to him, which, after an odd delay, he took in a quick shake. I began looking around, taking in every detail of the room. My eyes were immediately drawn to the back door, which still stood wide open. I could see the pale white sand caught in the glow from the doorway. Darkness lay beyond, but I could hear the pounding of the waves as they slammed violently into the beach. "So, where have you looked?" I asked them. Holiday shrugged. "We've looked everywhere, Deputy. There are no footsteps leading from the back door outside, and the only ones in front were from them coming home. Nothing's been stolen from inside to our knowledge. Not that there's much of value in here, if I'm honest." He shook his head, pursing his lips and furrowing his brow. "That's not the strangest part, though," he added. I cocked my head. "What is?" I asked, still glancing around. My eyes slid over the small, cheap knickknacks lining the shelves, the ancient television set against the far wall, and the torn couch and chair set behind us. Like they had said, nothing looked disturbed. Holiday finally answered. "Mays didn't take any of his clothes." I started, turning to look at the man. "I beg your pardon," I said, another head shake. "Mays didn't take any of his clothes. His coat is still hanging up on its hook, along with his hat, scarf, and gloves. His boots are still sat by the shoehorn. Heck, he didn't even appear to get dressed. His shirt and pants are still crumpled by the bed." He shot a look out the back door. If he's out there, he's in nothing more than long johns, and that's it. My mind churned as it processed what I had been told. I'm shivering while fully dressed in here. The man wouldn't be able to make it far without succumbing to the elements. But why would he leave like this, undressed and so abruptly? My gaze fell upon the kitchen where I spied the fridge standing slightly open, yellow light spilling out from within. I crossed to it, the officers trailing behind. On the countertop next to the fridge, the ingredients to make a sandwich had been placed. An open jar of mayonnaise and a butter knife stood beside 2 slices of bread and ham which had been set down. My mind put dots together, creating a mental picture in it. Well, it looks like he came out from the bedroom to make himself a late-night snack, I said, reaching out and gently closing the fridge door. I looked back at the living room and then walked towards it. He was making the snack when something drew his attention to the back door. I turned and looked at the shaft of light spilling outside in the void beyond. I could see the half-awake man in my mind's eye, slowly approaching the closed door. He got to the back door and opened it, and then I trailed off, staring at the sand directly on the other side of the door. No footprints were visible in it, just as the officers had said. One of the other officers spoke up, a short, stocky guy with a military-style crew cut. And then what? I continued to stare at the sand. Something about it looked off, something that I couldn't place. Finally, I shook my head. I honestly don't know, officer, I answered. It's like he just winked out of existence the moment that he opened the door. The man spoke again, his voice holding a small note of contempt in it. So that's your professional opinion. He winked out of existence like some sci-fi pulp novel. Holiday spoke up. Sean, easy, the deputy's doing his best at assessing the scene. The other officer, Sean, snorted but said nothing more. I took a step outside, making sure to step well over the area where any trace evidence might be. Pulling my flashlight from my belt, I clicked it on and shone it down and then around. The sand appeared to be undisturbed for at least 20 feet from the cabin. I clicked my light off, allowing my eyes to adjust to the darkness. At the edge of my vision, I saw the surf crashing against the shore, the black rolling waves seeming almost ominous with the present situation that I found myself in. As I stood there looking out at the ocean, a feeling suddenly fell over me, one that I hadn't felt since moving to the island, one that I had often had while working the beat in the city. It wasn't a welcome feeling either. It was the sensation of being watched, and by someone who had the worst intentions. I slowly stood up, my instincts flooding back to me as though I had never turned them off. I could feel the eyes boring into the back of my skull, as intense as I had ever sensed in my life. A shiver cascaded up my spine, and I slowly began moving my free hand towards the revolver on my belt. I kept my breathing slow and steady, but the feeling was growing stronger, as if whoever was doing the staring was getting closer. Mental images of times that I had had addicts or criminals attempt to ambush me tore through my mind, and yet the sensation felt different. It was a more primal response, if that would properly describe it. It was as though my body felt in more danger than it ever had back in Boston. Trying not to draw attention to it, I silently unsnapped the loop holding the gun in place. Behind me, I heard a single sound, the snap of a branch or piece of brush cracking underfoot, and it was less than 15 feet behind me. A new feeling fell over me, one that I didn't like. Fear. I didn't know why, but the sound coupled with the sudden silence that followed sent a waterfall of it through me. I didn't dare hesitate any longer. I ripped the revolver from its holster, whirling around and snapping the light on. At the same instant, I swear, no, I know that I saw a flurry of movement from the undergrowth behind me. I aimed both the light and the gun at the space, but when the beam reached it, it had already gone. I took a quick breath and then yelled out, my voice deep and authoritative. "Nantucket Sheriff's Department, come out of there with your hands up." I heard an explosion of movement coming from behind me, heard the officers, both inside the house and in front of it, begin calling out. But I stayed trained on the area, beginning to move around the side of the brush for a better view. Whoever it had been, and every part of me said that it hadn't been a simple animal, Couldn't have gone very far. I heard someone call out my name. "Deputy Codas, what is it?" I heard Holiday's voice boom out. "Somebody's back over here. They booked it as soon as they realized that their hiding spot was compromised." I called back, not taking my eyes off the space. There was no movement now, but I wasn't taking any chances. Moments later, almost all the officers along with the sheriff had joined me, their weapons drawn and pointing at the line of brush. After a few tense moments of ordering whoever it was to come out, myself and a few of the officers moved in to clear it. We found nothing. Nobody was in the brush. Whoever it had been was long gone. I was almost afraid that I would be labeled jumpy or just hearing things until Sean, the officer who I had not gotten along with, called that he had found a lot of trampled and cracked brush, almost exactly 15 feet from where I had been standing. It confirmed my story. This put a much darker atmosphere over everything. We might no longer be dealing with a simple disappearance, but a much more nefarious case. Once we were sure that nobody was around, we gathered out in front of the house. Once the sheriff had guided Mrs. Mays inside, assuring her that an officer would be parked outside all night for safety, the chief addressed all of us. "Gentlemen, what I'm about to request of you all is of the utmost importance. This is an ongoing investigation, and as such, it needs to be kept out of the media. We don't need the newspapers and especially these stations on the mainland to get a hold of this. Not only could it mess our investigation up, but it would send the populace into a panic, and we can't afford that. So please just keep this to yourselves until such time I state otherwise. Is that understood?" Everyone else nodded almost immediately. I felt another knot begin to tie itself in my stomach. I didn't agree with the chief's call. Whenever we had a bad case in the city, alerting the media helped to keep the public aware and safe. I felt as though the chief were more thinking in terms of containing the damage than finding Mr. Mays, or the person who had been skulking around watching us. Even still though, I nodded. All these decades later, I wish that I had had the sense to alert the media and not let it get buried under the rug. As we drove back to the sheriff's station, I voiced my concern to the sheriff, who now sat in the passenger seat writing out a report on his clipboard. He nodded when I finished. "I understand your concerns, Vincent," he began, "but the chief has good reasons for choosing to keep a lid on such a sensitive issue, and they're the ones that I happen to agree with." I began to speak again, but he raised a hand to silence me. "There's nothing more to be discussed on the subject, Deputy. You are to stay quiet about this case, understood?" The tone of his voice indicated that it was an order and not a request. I simply nodded and then turned back to the empty road ahead. When the man spoke again, his tone was softer. "Hopefully we'll find Brian Mays soon, along with whoever was watching you. I can't see this going beyond a single case. Just relax, son." I nodded again, still feeling as wound up as a rattlesnake inside, but trying to let the man's words be of some comfort. Still though, I remembered the feeling that I had had out back at the house, the almost primal fear, the thought that I couldn't push away that, if I hadn't been aware and turned around when I did, I would have been attacked, maybe dragged off without a trace like Brian Mays had. I pushed the thought away. I hoped that the sheriff was right. I had hoped this would be the only case that I would have to deal with of this nature. It somehow unnerved me, almost scared me more than anything that I had dealt with in Boston. I actually prayed that night that this would be the end of things. And when I fell asleep to dark and disturbing dreams of the poor man being dragged away by a shadowy figure to an unknown fate, I almost felt that he would be right. Oh, he was wrong. So very wrong. 2 nights later, halfway through the graveyard shift, we received another call from the chief. Another person had been reported missing, this time from a home near the South Shore. A 23-year-old woman named Jenny, who had worked as a cashier at one of the grocers downtown. Her boyfriend had, just like Annette Mays, woken up to find it freezing, and gone downstairs to find the back door opening onto the beach, swinging in the wind pouring off of the Atlantic. When we arrived, it was almost a carbon copy of the maze case. She hadn't taken any clothes, and it seemed that she had woken up to use the bathroom when she had gone down to investigate something at the back door. There was one difference, though, that caught my eye. A Russian nesting doll which had sat on a shelf next to the open door had been toppled from its perch, spilling at these smaller dolls onto the carpet. The sight of the spilled and chipped toy caused a new wave of trepidation and, yes, fear to sweep inside me. It's not much, but it's a sign of a struggle of some kind. Again, the chief told everyone, including Jenny's boyfriend, to keep quiet until he said otherwise. And again, everybody agreed. Everyone but me. I couldn't understand why everybody was so ardent about not alerting the general public to what now was no longer an isolated incident, but the beginning of a pattern. And when 2 more people disappeared from their homes in almost identical fashion in the span of a week, one an elderly man in his 80s and a teenager of no more than 15, the feeling grew stronger. I was toiling over the idea of anonymously alerting the mainland news, or even just the local paper, when the next call came in. It was another disappearance, but this one was not an islander, which surprised me. Not many people from the mainland came to the island during the winter months, but apparently this woman had. A scientist named Kilcoyne. She had flown to the island a few nights prior, and after falling asleep after a night out with local friends, her brother, some bigwig for IBM computers I learned later who had come with her, had woken up to a scene that I had become far too familiar with. When we arrived at the fancy house in Tom Nevers, I saw instantly that the chief was angry. He looked calm for all outer appearances, but I saw him gritting his teeth tight as he spoke to the brother, and then he strode over to us. "Another one, Chief?" the sheriff asked. He nodded. And of all people, it had to be the sister of a rich and well-connected city slicker. I started at the man's harsh tone. He's not going to be somebody that we can keep quiet like the others. He continued, shaking his head. The Coast Guard is going to be called, and somehow the media already had gotten a hold of the story. He shot me a suspicious look, as though he suspected that I had somehow been able to call the paper on mainland in the half hour since we had taken off. I shrugged, but inside, I felt a small sense of victory. I wish I had been the one who called, but maybe now word will get out. It needs to. We did our walkthrough. Again, just like before, the back door to the house stood wide open. None of her clothes had been put on, and no trace of her footstep were found outside in the sand. However, there was one difference in this case, something that I had noticed as I had looked at the back door. There, set in the door frame just below eye level, were what appeared to be 2 or 3 deep gouges. They weren't that big, and against the other nicks and grooves in the wood, it might have not been noticed, but I knew they were fresh. I ran my fingers over the grooves, surprised at how deep they truly were. It was as if 2 or 3 sharp kitchen knives had been slammed into and dragged through the wood. For whatever reason, a shiver shot up my spine, one that was equal parts fearful and wary. I quickly brought the sheriff over, who regarded the marks with an odd look. It was almost as if he had seen them before, and he simply asked me to mention it in my report. As he turned away, I glanced down at the sand just outside the door. I was dismayed to see that, like May's case, like all the others, one thing that I had always noticed was that the sand by the door just seemed unnatural in the way that it sat, not looking blown about by the wind like the rest of it. I stepped out of the door and looked around. The wind bit at my face, and I turned away from it, looking out at the crashing waves. For some reason, the sight of the dark, churning water along with the ominous-looking dark clouds above caused me to shiver. A feeling suddenly swept over me, the same that I had had that night we had gone to the maze house, the same feeling that I had had when we had gone to investigate all of the disappearances. Of being watched, observed like I was a fish in a fishbowl. I swung around, my head darting in all directions, but I saw no one on the empty beach or the nearby sand dunes. but still the feeling remained and the same unexplainable sense of fear returned. Not wanting to stay out here alone any longer, I turned to head back inside, but I stopped. The nagging thought that I had been unable to vocalize about the sand finally clicked, and I looked down at it. It almost looked like it had been swept, I whispered. A few hours later, the state troopers from the mainland had arrived, and the sheriff told me to take the cruiser and head back to the station. Johnson will be there to drive it back here and take over for the day. Your shift is ended for the night. He began to turn away when I cleared my throat. Sir, with all due respect, don't you think that we should tell the state police along with the media that this woman isn't the one who's... He cut me off sharply. No, nobody will be telling either of them anything. That's an order, and if you attempt to disobey it, I will detain and arrest you. Is that clear? My jaw dropped open as I stared at him. His words had been the last that I had expected. The man shot daggers at me and then jerked his arm at the open front door, where I saw a large congregation of officers speaking to the chief, along with a reporter from the Island News. Now go and have a good day. And with that, I turned away. To this day, I still can't properly explain the emotions that ran through me as I walked outside and got into the cruiser. The closest I can describe was that I felt bound and gagged, a prisoner without shackles. As I drove back to the station, I began to give some serious thought about transferring off the island and leaving. Nothing about this entire situation smelled right. When I had come to Nantucket, I originally wanted to spend the rest of my life here. It seemed so different, so peaceful. But now, after the last week or so, it felt tainted. If anything, it felt worse than the city. The city had dope peddlers, murderers, and fiends, but you knew about them. This place felt like secrets that shouldn't be concealed. And worse, after the look that I had seen on the sheriff's face, it almost felt like he knew something, if not had an idea of who was taking these people. I had no idea that I would be faced with one final disappearance a few days later, one that would draw me into the most terrifying and horrific experience of my life. I wasn't even on duty when it happened. I had been transferred to the day shift by the sheriff, who I was still on thin ice with. My shift ended at just after 10 at night, and I climbed into my Jeep for the drive back to my house near Sacajah Pond. I pulled out a cassette tape from the tray under the dash and slid it in. The opening guitar riffs of the Rolling Stones gave me shelter echoing out from the speakers. As I drove, my mind became more and more firm in its decision to quit the department and leave the island. I turned onto a road that paralleled the ocean on the right, houses lining up and blocking the view of the beach. I just can't do this anymore. I can't be a part of some cover-up for whatever dumb reason the chief has. This is just too. I glanced up to see something run out into the road in front of me. No, not something, someone. Crap, I yelled out, jamming my feet on the brake and clutch pedals. The back wheels of the Jeep locked up, and for a moment, the world whirled around and my ears filled with the noise of screeching tires. And then the Jeep came to a stop with a lurch, looking back the way that I had come. I sat there trying to catch my breath for a few seconds when the face appeared, almost pressing up against the windshield. Gah! I yelled out, my hand flying to my personal pistol lying under the dash. But I stopped as I saw the panicked expression of the young woman's face, a girl no older than 16. Please help me, sir, she wailed out. Unlocking the door, I made sure the Jeep's parking brake was on before jumping outside. Immediately, the girl ran around the door and buried her face in my stomach. She was crying uncontrollably, and I could tell that she was almost out of her mind with fear. Still, I needed to know what was going on. Sweetie, it's okay, I'm an off-duty deputy. Try and calm down and tell me what happened. Instantly, the girl's face looked up at me, and I couldn't help but shiver slightly, both at the petrified expression adorning her features, along with the words that she babbled out. I woke up to use the bathroom, and I heard my daddy downstairs doing something. He always stays up late. But then I heard him curse and something crashed. I heard breaking glass and wood, and then I heard something scream and hiss. Something horrible. She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her nightgown. I heard my daddy scream in pain and ran downstairs. Now she began to scream as she finished. It had him and it was dragging him out the back door. He was bleeding. Please help me. Another shiver shot through me, but I pushed it down. You have to stay in control of yourself, Vincent. Your first duty is to keep the girl safe and call for backup. Then you need to see if the father is still near the house. The girl is delirious and thinks a masked man was something else. You need to move fast. Nodding at my own thoughts, I guided the girl into the passenger seat and then locked the door. Returning to the driver's side, I grabbed my pistol along with the spare flashlight, before reaching for the CB radio that I had wired under the dash. Tuning into the frequency the sheriff's department used, I hit the transmit button. Any deputy monitoring this frequency, this is Deputy Codes, requesting urgent backup. Does anybody copy? The voice that answered was Johnson's. Codes, this is Johnson. What's going on? Over. Johnson, notify the sheriff and tell him to get as many local police out to my location as well. I just came across a panicked girl who said somebody broke in and took her father. I let the words hang in the air for a moment, letting them sink in. Oh Christ, not another one. I heard Johnson breathe. I hit the transmit button again. I'm leaving the girl in my Jeep and going to check out the house to see if the father is still alive. Get back up here ASAP. I heard him respond, but I had already turned to the girl. Sweetie, I need to leave you in the truck while I go to see if your father's okay. She began to frantically shake her head, but I put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. It's all right, more police are on the way. Just stay in the truck and keep the door locked, okay? I'll be right back. And with that, I locked the driver's door and shut it with a clunk. I turned towards the darkened shape of the house the girl had to have run into the road from. Even from here, I could see the front door hanging wide open, occasionally swinging when a gust of wind came. A single light burned out from what had to have been the living room. Other than that, though, everything was quiet. There were no bird calls, no animals in the brush. The only things that I could hear were the pounding of the surf from the other side of the house and the creak as a swing bench mounted to the front porch swiveled in the breeze. Otherwise, silence. To this day, I can still recall the amount of adrenaline and fear that coursed through my veins as I prepared for what might be a violent confrontation. Swallowing harder than I usually did, I shot one last look at the Jeep and then began to walk towards it. As soon as I had reached the path to the front porch, I slowed down, the hand gripping my pistol now slightly sweaty even with the chill. I took a moment to breathe deep and then began to slowly creep towards the house, making sure my footsteps made as little noise as possible. There was still no movement from the house, but the atmosphere that I was picking up set me even more on edge than I thought possible. The air seemed charged and tense, as if the world around me were collectively holding its breath. And there was another feeling that I was picking up on, something that I couldn't place yet, and it was the same that I had had at all the other disappearance sites, except this one was 10 times stronger. Reaching the porch, I had tested the bottom step to make sure that it wouldn't creak and then ascended to open the front door. The entryway was dark, but even in the gloom I could see a staircase leading to the second floor just inside. A hallway led around it towards the back of the house, and I could also see a doorway leading off to another room to the right. There's likely an identical doorway to the left if the layout of this place is similar to my house. I waited a moment, forcing everything except my training out of the forefront of my mind, and then I stepped halfway through the door. I had been correct in my assumption. A doorway to what seemed to be a sitting room lay on my left. I tilted my head so that I could see down the hallway. Nothing moved in the stillness, and I could hear the ticking of a clock echoing from the end of it. I took another deep breath, and then, as much as I didn't want to, I forced myself to follow procedure and call out. Nantucket Sheriff's Department, if anybody's in there, please make yourself known. My voice sounded almost muted as it filled the house. Well, there goes the element of surprise. I flicked my flashlight on, tucking the wrist holding it under my gun hand, the yellow beam trailing up the stairs toward the second floor. I eyed the half-open windows at the top of the landing apprehensively, Normally, the standard procedure for a single officer clearing a home is to do the ground floor first and then move upstairs. But ever since I had gone to a domestic disturbance call 5 years ago, one where a man coked out of his mind had burst out of the upstairs bedroom with a shotgun while I had been clearing the first floor, I had ingrained it in me to clear the second floor first. Moving to the stairs, I climbed them quickly, thankful that, aside from a small creak on the second step, they didn't make any noise. The first door led to what had to be the father's bedroom, the large bed empty. The second opened onto a small upstairs bathroom. The third led into what had to be the girl's bedroom. As I saw a half-open closet on the other side, I chose to enter the room, crossing and making sure that nobody was hiding inside. Confident that nobody was upstairs, I turned and began to head back out to the hallway, but I froze as I spared a glance out of the window. The window of the girl's bedroom faced the back of the house towards the beach. It was dark, but the clouds had pulled back some, allowing the moon to shine down onto the sand and spill into the room. It provided enough light to look down to the ground, where I caught a glimpse of a darkened figure moving. It was only for a split second whoever it had been had stepped out of line of sight visible from the room, but it was enough. I quickly clicked off my light, feeling my heart begin to beat harder in my chest. I trusted my instincts, and all of them were telling me that whoever the figure had been, that it wasn't the girl's father. Moving out into the hallway, I trained the gun back downstairs. Nothing moved inside, but to say the air inside the house had taken on an even worse atmosphere would be understating it. Every darkened corner now felt threatening. Every gust of the wind hitting the windows made me feel that much tenser. Descending the stairs, I first cleared the sitting room, finding it empty, and then I made my way down the hallway towards the back of the house. I found myself in a long but narrow kitchen, the tile floor reflecting in the moonlight. This too looked to be clear. I saw a door which appeared to lead outside to the beach but turned away. I needed to finish clearing the house, and after seeing the figure skulking around outside, I wasn't prepared to venture out there alone. I couldn't hear the sirens signaling my backup yet, but I knew that they had to already be on their way. Just clear the final rooms on the ground floor, then pull back out to the Jeep until the others arrive. Don't be a hero and don't be stupid. Not after seeing this guy's prior handiwork. My decision made, I slowly walked back towards the entryway. The soft sound of the clock behind me chiming caused me to freeze for a moment, and then I reached the other doorway. The light that I had seen in the front window appeared to come from this room. What I could now see appeared to be a study of some kind. Books lined the shelves on every wall, and an ornate desk and chairs sat in the middle of the room, papers piled on top. As my eyes flickered beyond the desk, where anybody could easily hide, a noise came from beyond, causing me to raise my weapon again. I saw a doorway that I hadn't noticed at first on the far side of the room, the door wide open. I crossed the study slowly, making sure nobody was crouched behind the desk before approaching the door. The room beyond was dark, but I could see a large table surrounded by chairs set up in the middle of it. A dining room. Moving silently now, I scanned the room. I saw no sign of movement inside, but something had begun welling up inside me as I approached the door. Every fiber of my being had been put on high alert, and I was cognizant of everything from the wind to the beating of my heart. Out of everything in the house, this room seemed to give off the worst vibes, and it was likely due to the fact that across the room, I could see the open door which led outside to the beach. I had just taken a few steps into the room when I heard a soft squelch come from beneath my foot. Freezing, I looked down, but I couldn't see much, even with the moonlight spilling in from the doorway. Weighing my options, I decided to quickly flick on my flashlight for a second to see what I had stepped in. I aimed the light down, and holding the beam with my gun hand, I flicked it on. To this very day, I wish to God I never had. As I had said, in every other disappearance that I had been called to, aside from the nesting doll knocked over at the girl's house, there had been no signs of violence, no signs of a struggle, nothing. Well, that was not the case here. The first thing I noticed was the broken dishes that littered the floor. Tiny pieces lay scattered all around me, as if somebody had grabbed the china on the dining room table and thrown it at something or someone. The second thing I noticed was that both chairs on this side of the table had been knocked over. One had the ornate wooden carved back broken, showing somebody had been slammed into it with great force. The unknown feeling that I had had at all the prior disappearances was worming its way forward, past all my training and defenses like lava bursting from the surface. The third thing that I saw was the blood. The dining room table had been placed on top of a large braided carpet which covered the wooden floor to keep the cold from seeping up and disrupting those eating at it. And it had been thoroughly soaked in blood. I could see the large stain that I had stepped in, and looking left to right, I saw that the table and display case for the china was splattered in blood as well. Instantly, I knew that the girl's father was dead. No person could lose this much blood and survive. The unknown feeling finally burst forth, and I finally understood what it was. Dread. I flicked my flashlight off quickly, suddenly feeling extremely vulnerable. This is far beyond any straightforward kidnapping or robbery. This is beyond the scope likely of what these people are used to. And we've been dealing with a serial killer this entire time, and I don't care about the consequences. I'm calling the mainland right. I was snapped out of my thoughts by a noise, one which came from out the open back door. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt my heart begin to thunder in my chest as I gripped my pistol tightly. Slowly I raised my eyes. In the now bright moonlight, I could now see that the bloodstain turned into a smear, one that signaled something that the girl's father had been dragged. The smear led onto the wooden floor towards the door. Even from here I could see it lead onto the back porch and down the steps onto the beach. The sound came again, and I realized it was the creak of the back porch. I raised the gun and pointed it at the doorway. Somebody was out there just out of sight. I saw something move, casting a shadow which stretched across the porch and into my line of sight. For a second, I didn't fully process what I was seeing, and then it slammed into me with all the weight of a semi-truck. The shadow had a human-like shape to it, but the proportions were all wrong. Even accounting for warping by the moonlight, the figure seemed too tall. The arms seemed to reach too far down, and the shadow of the head looked misshapen. And then it moved, and my blood suddenly ran cold as I heard the sound of it breathing, a wheezing rattle of air almost as if it were fighting to suck oxygen into its lungs. The porch creaked more as I saw the shadow grow larger, and then a fresh surge of fear flooded into me as I saw a second shadowy figure appear on the sandy path to the beach. It wasn't directly in the moonlight, but I saw it begin to stagger towards the doorway, and even though it was far away, I got the impression that it had already spotted me. Oh, and there's more than one of them, my mind whispered to me. And then the one out of sight let out a laugh. I still shiver to this day recalling it. It was wet, gurgling, almost as if it were laughing through a mouth of seawater, and it held a malicious glee to it that chilled me to the bone. Nothing human could have let out such a laugh. That was when something snaked around the door from the opposite side. My eyes locked on it, and I felt all the blood drain out of my face. I finally managed to whisper out 2 words, barely audible. "Screw me." Dread and terror like I had never felt before crashed into me like a rogue wave. I only stood there for another second, and then I was running. I turned and bolted from the dining room, sprinting through the study as I heard another inhuman laugh sound from behind me. I didn't even give a second thought to using the gun. I knew that it would be as effective as the china plates had been against them. I raced out the front door and down the steps. I was halfway to my Jeep when the lights suddenly snapped on, blinding me and freezing me in place. "Freeze, drop your weapon." I heard a man's voice order. "Hey, don't shoot, I'm a deputy." I cried out, the delirium of fear racing through my veins, causing my voice to come out higher and shriller than I had ever heard it before. For another few seconds, nobody spoke, and I feared that I would be fired upon. But then a familiar voice rang out, "Lower your weapons, it's my deputy." The lights lowered as well, and I finally saw that my backup had already arrived. I was facing what looked like the entire island's police department, plus the sheriff's department as well. I saw the sheriff standing next to the police chief, both holding shotguns. Stony-faced officers stood on all sides of them. I saw that a few of them had already retrieved the girl from my Jeep. A blanket had been draped across her shoulders as she sat in the back of a waiting ambulance. I frantically gestured behind me at the house. "They're back there, there's at least 2 of them," I said, my voice still trembling. I saw the chief and the sheriff exchange a dark look with each other. Then they were ordering the officers into the house. They swarmed around me and up the steps as an EMT rushed and guided me back to lean against one of the squad cars. I could hear them calling out to one another as they cleared inside as I was examined. "He's okay, Sheriff," he said as he finished and stepped back. "Just looks like he's in a bit of shock is all." The sheriff nodded and then gestured for me to follow him. As I did, I noticed something. None of these cruisers have their lights on, and they didn't use their sirens either. Even as focused as I was, I would have heard them approaching. The realization didn't sit right with me, neither did the look on the sheriff's face. With a low voice, the man asked me what had happened, what I had seen when I had entered the house. Fighting the adrenaline and fear still coursing through my system, I did my best to recount everything that had happened since placing the girl in my Jeep. When I had gotten to the part about what I had seen in the back door of the dining room, I saw his face darken even further than it already was. They do know what those things are. He stayed quiet for a time after I had finished, and then he sighed, as if he had come to a conclusion that he hadn't wanted to and spoke. "None of what you just told me is going to be written in your report, Deputy." I stared at the man in disbelief before he continued. "There's not going to be an incident report of this entire situation, to be more precise. As far as it will be concerned, it never happened." "Are you freaking serious, sir?" He nodded. "Oh, I'm dead serious, Deputy. And that is not all. When you return to the station tomorrow, you will find that none of the incident reports that you filed for the past cases, with the sole exception being the Kilcoin case, are there. They have been destroyed, and as of now, they never happened." I let out a half gasp, half laugh of shock. He didn't let me speak, though. He continued, "You're not an islander, Vincent. You came from the mainland. I say this with all due respect, but you're an outsider, and outsiders will never truly understand some things about life here. This," he gestured towards the house that was still filled with officers, "this is one of them." I finally found my voice again. "Sir, with all due respect to you as well, you're talking about covering up the disappearances, wait no, the deaths of 6 people. 6 people that were butchered and dragged off by God only knows what those things were. And you want me to shut my mouth and let you sweep this under the rug?" He locked eyes with me at my words, and I saw a look in them that I had never seen before. A hardness that he usually only reserved for criminals. "Yes, Deputy, I do. At least if you ever want to return to the mainland." I felt my jaw drop open at the man's open, not just implied threat. He spoke again. "We have dealt with them for a long time now, longer than I have been alive. As far as I know, since people moved to the island, and we've always taken care of our own when they return. We keep who we can save. And as for the unfortunate souls," he trailed off. "What about those who lost people?" I said, feeling a little surge of angry heat overwhelm the terrified side of myself. I gestured towards the girl now being loaded into the ambulance. "What about people like her?" He spared a look and then turned back to me. "We make sure they understand why we don't say anything to people from the mainland, for the exact reason that I'm dealing with now, Deputy. We take care of our own. I glared at him for another moment and then lowered my eyes. The sheriff's threat had been clear, and I had no doubt that between him, the chief, and the others on the island, if I didn't accept the terms given to me, that I might end up disappearing as well. Finally, I asked one final question. And Kilcoyne, how are you going to explain that one? We'll place breadcrumbs, make it seem like she might have simply decided to walk out into the water and end it all. Maybe a person followed her from the mainland and abducted her. We'll figure it out, don't you worry. After a time, I finally nodded at not meeting the man's eyes. Fine, I said weakly. Fine, I won't say anything. I felt him place his hand on my shoulder. If you want to leave, I don't blame you one bit. I'll even give you a letter of recommendation for wherever on the mainland you would like to transfer to, as long as you keep your word. I didn't say anything back to him. I simply pulled out of his grasp and walked back to my Jeep, getting into it, and I drove away. I left Nantucket the very next day, turning in my letter of resignation to the sheriff's office and calling a moving company on the mainland to come and empty my house. I would end up placing it for sale once I left, happily, and it sold quickly to a nice family to use as their summer home. As I drove my Jeep onto the ferry, I remember seeing so many pairs of eyes on me. I saw the sheriff waving me farewell from the dock. I saw some of the residents giving me the side eye. I also felt other eyes on me, but those that I couldn't see the owners of. They came from beneath the dark waters of the Atlantic, and the feeling of them watching me never abated until the ferry was halfway back to the mainland. That was almost 44 years ago now. I ended up taking a job with the Massachusetts State Police, helped by the letter of recommendation that I did end up receiving from the sheriff. I kept that job for another 20 years before retiring in 2000. The sheriff had told the truth about what would happen in the case of Margaret Kilcoyne as well. Even though the case made the mainland news, owing to her brother trying to force new leads, they only found some clothes of her abandoned near a pond, along with her ID and some money, no doubt deliberately placed there to throw the state police and others off. Many ended up believing that she had committed suicide by drowning, and though the case stayed open for a while, interest eventually waned in and went cold. Today, barely anyone ever remembers the case, and many of those that did have died. Nobody ever found out the truth. Because islanders can keep a secret, I only ever went back to Nantucket once on a day trip in 2013. I honestly don't know why I did. Maybe I thought it would be a form of closure that I felt I had never gotten. It didn't help though. The place looked largely unchanged in 33 years, and all the memories came flooding back to me, especially when I drove by the house that had haunted my dreams for decades. The swing still hung from the front porch, and I shivered in the driver's seat of my Saab across the street, the memories seeming as fresh as if they had happened yesterday. Especially the memory of that webbed clawed hand snaking around the back door, the dark green, almost black scales glinting in the moonlight, the claws digging into the wood like it had been paper mache. I was happy to drive back onto the ferry to return to Cape Cod before the sun went down. I didn't feel the eyes on me like I had had all those years ago, but I knew they were still there, waiting. I'm in my early 70s now. The end of my life is rapidly approaching, especially after I was diagnosed with psoriasis of the liver a year ago, a result of drinking far too much for most of my life in an attempt to try and forget. But not even alcohol was ever enough to chase away the memories, the nightmares that woke me in a sheen of sweat, screaming. I finally decided, with me staring up at the bladed scythe of the Grim Reaper, that I needed to tell the truth about what happened all those years ago. Keeping quiet for over 40 years had burned a hole in my soul, and the threats from the sheriff, likely now long since dead, threw at me ring hollow. And so after hearing about this website, and more importantly this page, I heard about from my grandnephew, where others post accounts of things that they've experienced that are unexplainable and terrifying, I've chosen here to tell. I know full well that most people won't believe me, and that's honestly fine, and maybe it doesn't matter. But the truth is out there now. It's known. My conscience feels lighter being able to share it, and when it's my time, I'll go far more peacefully. But there's another reason that I've chosen to tell you all what happened in 1980. That frigid January so many miles from the mainland. It's to give you a warning, because I've kept tabs on the goings-on on Nantucket Island, and people still do disappear from there. Fishermen and others have disappeared from the island and the waters around it over the years, and those are the ones who, thanks to the internet and its ability to connect the entire world, weren't able to be swept under the rug. I'm sure there are far more people who disappear from the island than anyone will ever know. They're just still good at covering it up. I can't stop any one of you from going to Nantucket, and in all honesty, I'm not sure that I would want to. It in truth is still one of the most beautiful places that I've ever been to. If you would like to visit during the summer months, go. But if you do, don't let your guard down near the water at all. Because those things, those creatures are still out there. They are smart enough to clean up after themselves to remove all traces of their presence. The swept sand was proof of that. Stay near others as much as possible. Don't rent remote houses away from everybody else. And most importantly, if you ever hear any noises coming from around your house at night there, don't be like those unfortunate souls. Don't go and open the back door to investigate, because it'll likely be the last thing you ever do. A couple of years ago, an American missionary was killed by locals while walking ashore on North Sentinel Island, a small outcrop in the Indian Ocean halfway between India and Myanmar. The inhabitants, who were well known for their aggressiveness towards outsiders, cut him down with a barrage of arrows and spears, killing the poor soul less than a minute after he got out of his kayak. They then buried him in the sand and retreated back into the forest that covers the interior of the place. The entire thing was witnessed by local Indian fishermen, whom the missionary had paid to transport him to the island. Reading the newspaper articles about the unfortunate event brought back a lot of memories for me, because 10 years earlier, I went ashore on that very same beach. The only difference was that I did so during a cloudy night, and needless to say, I didn't get caught. Altogether, I spent 7 days on the island, and I got to see a whole lot more than the beach. Some of it I wish I could unsee, but unfortunately, it will remain with me until the day that I close my eyes for the final time. But before I get into what had happened, let me give you a little bit of background information. My name is Michael Huddersfield, and from 1992 to 2010, I was employed by a shadowy corporation called Fear Inc. It's a group that's been around since the 1950s, and whose sole purpose is to provide exceptional thrills for its members. The way this is achieved is by sending their employees to hotspots all over the globe. The employees are always unarmed and only equipped with a camera and minimal food rations. The members then get to see how they fare, and bets are placed on whether the employee will make it out of the hotspot alive or not. At the end of each day, the members are presented with a video report shot by the employee at the scene, enabling them to follow the progress and get an idea of whether they'll lose or win their bets. And then 7 days after the employee entered the hotspot, he or she is allowed to leave and make their way back to safety. If they are successful in their endeavor, and trust me, that's not always the case, they're given a $100,000 completion fee. Does this concept sound terrifying? And does it sound like something you would want to try your hand at? If it does, you'll have to find one of our recruiters and persuade him that you're a worthy candidate. Personally, I didn't have to go looking for one. The recruiter approached me. I was in a bar in Manaus in the northern parts of Brazil, after having spent a month assisting the rebels in Suriname in their attempts to overthrow the ruling president. I was well into my third beer when a somber-looking Dutch guy sat down on the stool next to me at the bar. "I don't suppose you'd be interested in making some serious money," he said in a broken English accent, a few moments after the bartender had passed him an ice-cold bottle of Heineken. I looked at him for a few moments, my eyebrows raised. He was tall and skinny, and had that sun-kissed look that Northern Europeans often get after a few days in a tropical environment. He was dressed in an expensive-looking polo shirt and white shorts that almost reached down to his knees, and he had brown, expensive-looking leather sandals on his feet. The first thought that ran through my mind was that he was having me on. Either that or he was working for some drug cartel and wanted me to smuggle something that would result in a lengthy prison sentence when things went belly up. And considering that I had no intention of spending any time in a Brazilian prison, I shook my head. "No thanks, not interested, mate," I said, and I went back to sipping on my beer. From the corner of my eye, I could see the guy grab his wallet and remove something from it. He then slid it across the bar in my direction. I looked down on it and saw that it was a business card. The name on it said Dirk Vanderklerk, and there was a phone number and a post office box address printed below it. "I realize that my offer is highly unusual," the guy said after I picked up the card and I looked at it. "But nevertheless, it is a genuine offer." He took another swig from the bottle and wiped the beer from his top lip with the back of his hand. "Tell you what, give your friend Danny a call. He knows who I am and he knows that I'm a man of my word. Then if you're still interested, give me a call, then we can discuss the details." He then took one last sip of his Heineken, stood up, and left. That was my first encounter with a representative from Fear Inc. A month later, I had earned my first $100,000 completion fee in war-ravished Sierra Leone. I had operated in that country before, but never without a weapon, and never on my own. I'm not going to go into any details about what I did there. Suffice to say, it was a hair-raising experience, and that I was very close to losing my life on several occasions. But somehow, I managed to get out of there in one piece, and I have been able to replicate that feat ever since. As the saying goes, practice makes perfect. Looking back on all of it, I'm still amazed that I managed to stay alive for as long as I have, considering that the average life expectancy of a Fear Inc. employee is only a year and a half. I lasted for more than 18 years, and unlike most of my colleagues, I was able to hand in my resignation and walk away from it all with a hefty bank balance. Why did I succeed where others failed? I guess it's all due to my background in the armed forces. I was 17 and a half when I joined the British Royal Marines, and I ended up serving in that regiment for 5 years, including stints in Northern Ireland, and 2 very cold and miserable months in the Falkland Islands during the war with Argentina. At the end of my 5th year, I tried out for the SBS, the Special Boat Service, an elite regiment similar to the SAS. I was able to pass selection and spent the next 7 years there, going on quite a few missions to Northern Ireland and a handful of Africa. I can't go into too much detail, as the missions are classified, but rest assured, it gave me the hands-on experience I needed to make it for as long as I did with Fear Inc. After leaving the SBS, I spent 3 years working as a military consultant, or as it is more commonly referred to, a mercenary. And that's when I ran into Dirk in that bar in Brazil, and started my career as an employee of Fear Inc. The things I've seen could easily fill several dozen books, and who knows, maybe one day I will sit down and write about all the things I experienced during my time in the organization. But for now, I will only describe what happened on 2 assignments. 2 is more than enough to give you an idea of what being an employee of Fear Inc. is all about. And besides, I hate to repeat myself. The first story I'm going to tell is about what took place on North Sentinel Island, and the second is about what happened when I spent a week in Grozny, Chechnya, during the very bloody and very dirty war with Russia. North Sentinel Island. The year was 2008, and I was on board a 200-foot luxurious yacht that belonged to the corporation. I had spent nearly 20 hours flying, the first leg from London to Bangkok, and then from Bangkok to the international airport in Port Blair, on the South Andaman Island in the Bay of Bengal. The last leg of the journey was only an hour and a half, but by that stage, I had enough flying and I couldn't wait to arrive at my destination. Hence, the first thing I did after I was picked up from the airport and had settled into my cabin was to throw myself down on the bed and get some sleep. I certainly needed it, and I knew I wasn't going to get much of it for the next week. When I opened my eyes 6 hours later, I could feel the yacht rocking gently from side to side, and I knew that we were on our way to our destination, North Sentinel Island. I spent a few minutes looking up at the ceiling before I got up, splashed some water on my face, and picked up the phone next to the bed. "I'm up," was all I said, and I put the receiver back in the cradle again. A minute later, there was a soft rap on the door and a young Asian female appeared. "Please follow me, sir," was all that she said. I did what I was told and was escorted to the lounge on the upper deck, where two men were seated on a very comfortable-looking leather couch. "Hey, Mike, good to see you again," Dirk said in his broken English and gestured for me to sit down in one of the chairs. "I take it you had a pleasant flight." "Well, you know what it's like," I said. "After an hour you start to get bored, and after 10 you start to go bonkers." Dirk let out a polite laugh and nodded, and then he took a sip from the glass in his hand. "How you feeling? Are you nervous about going ashore?" I lifted my hand and I rubbed the tip of my nose with my fingers. The question was rather pointless, given the tremendous and very obvious danger that the mission represented. No one had ever set foot on that island and lived to tell the tale. They had all been killed, and the first few hand-witnessed accounts that had come from people on board boats just off the island had described the horrendous screaming coming from the hapless victims. In some cases, this had gone on for several minutes. "I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't feeling slightly nervous," I replied. Dirk nodded. "It's always good to be apprehensive, and that's what keeps you on your toes and ultimately alive. Without any fear, you get cocky and overconfident. And then..." Dirk quickly drew a finger across his throat and grinned. "Okay, the setup is the same as always," the guy next to Dirk said in a deep southern accent. He was in his late 50s, muscular, and had the face of a seasoned poker player. "You got the head cam, the usual communication gear and food rations that should last you for a week. Get as much footage of the natives as you can, and get as close to them as possible. We'll stay in touch and give you instructions twice a day. Any questions?" I shook my head. After nearly 16 years in the game, I knew how it worked and what was expected of me. And 7 hours later, I leaned back from my spot on top of the tubular hull of the Zodiac and momentarily disappeared below the surface of the dark, tropical ocean. The island was half a mile away, and if everything went according to plan, I would make landfall in just under 30 minutes. As I got back up to the surface, I gave the guys in the boat the thumbs up and watched as they turned the Zodiac around and disappeared towards the yacht, which was now just a tiny dot in the distance. And then I let myself sink under the surface again and began swimming towards the shore. The island covers an area of roughly 23 square miles, slightly smaller than Manhattan, and it is mostly covered in trees, apart from a narrow section of sand that stretches around the outer perimeter of the island. It's strictly illegal to visit this place, and the Indian authorities have set up a 3-mile exclusion zone around the island. Not that anyone in their right mind would want to pay the place a visit. The people who live there have no contact with the outside world, and they will kill anyone who set foot on their island without exception. And it was this inhospitable place that would be my home away from home for the next 7 days. If luck was on my side, I would live to tell the tale. If not, well, I wasn't too keen to think about that. I entered the lagoon on the western side 20 minutes later, and remained in the water for another 10 minutes, making sure that no one was keeping an eye on the beach. I'd already left my aqualung, weight belt, diving mask and flippers on the sandy surface just beyond the entrance of the lagoon. If I needed to get out of here in a hurry, I could jump in the water, swim out there, hook on the gear and make my escape. Once I was confident that there wasn't anyone around, I quickly went ashore on the rocky section of the beach. Walking on the sand was out of the question, as it would have left footprints and would have been akin to announcing my arrival with a loud flashbang. In my right hand was my diving knife, which I was clutching tightly and was more than ready to use if someone were to come rushing at me from among the trees. Thankfully, no one did, and I slipped into the forest and began making my way towards the center of the island. I was nervous, and the adrenaline was flowing freely through my system, as it always did when I was out on highly dangerous assignments. I was under no illusions as to what would happen if I got caught. I've seen numerous people executed and tortured to death up close. Once during a mission in the Congo, I was less than 40 yards away when rebels rammed a sharp stake up the arse of a government soldier and drove it through his throat. And then they stuck the thing in the dirt and left the poor sod there for everyone to see. But on that first night, I didn't see any of the natives, which was a good thing, because I had a lot of things to do, such as finding a good hiding spot and setting up camp. Luckily, the vegetation on the island is very dense. There are bushes and shrubbery pretty much everywhere you look, and they make for the perfect cover. The place I eventually chose was located on a ridge covered in thick bushes, which in addition to offering me ample cover, also provided me with a good vantage point. From my new position, I had a 360-degree view of my surroundings, and I would notice straight away if someone tried to sneak up on me. After I had everything set up, I radioed back to the yacht, letting them know that I was in position and safe. And then I simply closed my eyes and I slept until the sun rose in the east the following morning. The first sighting occurred towards the afternoon the following day. I had been making my way very slowly towards the east side of the island, and I had been at it for a good 4 hours, when I all of a sudden heard faint voices up ahead. I immediately stopped and I took cover behind a tree and sat completely still, my heart pumping furiously in my chest. I knew that I was as close to invisible as it is possible to get. I was dressed in a dark green camouflage suit, had a matching colored bush hat on my head, and my face was completely covered in dark paint. I had everything I needed to blend into the natural landscape. But still, the fear that I was experiencing was raw and very real. No matter how many times you've been in similar situations, you simply cannot control your emotions when death is lurking just around the corner. I probably spent a good 10 minutes behind that tree, focusing on the voices. They weren't getting any louder or fading away, and I correctly assumed that it had come from some type of settlement. As I was preparing myself mentally to push on, I automatically reached for the sheath I had strapped to my leg and very slowly pulled out my diving knife. And then I took a few deep breaths and slid out from behind the tree and began moving towards the voices. There were about a dozen of them sitting on big logs that had been arranged in a horseshoe-like shape. A little further away, 2 females were sitting in front of a lean-to preparing food. I could see a few huts made from sticks and what looked like palm rods. The huts were sturdy-looking things and shaped like pyramids, and I estimated that they could easily house up to half a dozen people at a time. Apart from the 2 women preparing the food, who were wearing some sort of straw necklaces, they were all completely naked. Their skin was as black as the night itself, and I realized that it would be very tricky to spot them during the evening without the aid of the night vision goggles. I would have to be very careful from here on. From my position behind some bushes about 50 yards away, I could see spears, bows and arrows, and what looked like scythes leaning up against the huts. And for a brief second, I found myself thinking that these were the weapons that they would use against me if they ever discovered me. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I quickly brushed it aside. There was no need to focus on things that hadn't happened yet, and for the time being, I was safe. They seemed completely unaware that I was spying on them. Very slowly and with a shaking hand, I pressed the record button on the headcam and began recording the scene before me. Later that evening, after I had returned to my shelter, I remember thinking to myself that this mission would be a fairly easy one. All I had to do was sneak up on the tribe once or twice a day for the remainder of my stay, make a few recordings, and then leave the same way that I had arrived at the end of the 7th-day period. And the remainder of my stay was everything but easy peasy, and on quite a few occasions, I was very close to getting spotted. The following morning was when everything started to go downhill. I was still inside my shelter when I heard a faint voice coming from my earpiece that was attached to the front of my suit. I grabbed it and I quickly stuck it in my ear. Receiving instructions about what to do was fairly common, so I wasn't overly surprised to hear Dirk's voice. "Hey Mike, how you holding up? No one's tried to kill you yet." "No, I'm still here," I whispered into the microphone on my lapel. "That's good, Mike. Now listen, we've got some instructions for you. We want you to make your way over to the southern tip of the island where there's a big lagoon. When you get there, we want you to keep an eye on it." I frowned and thought that it was an odd request. Normally, whenever Dirk would give me instructions, it was to get closer to the locals, carry out some risky stunt or remove some type of artifact or another. "Why do you want me to go there?" I asked, unable to hide the puzzlement in my voice. But Dirk didn't answer, and instead he proceeded to ask me another question. "How soon do you think you can get there?" I thought about it for a while. I was at least 4 miles away and I would have to walk through the forest. 6, maybe 7 hours. Could be sooner if I don't run into any problems." "Okay, good. Start moving, and let us know when you arrive." And then he abruptly finished the conversation, and I was left to wonder what the hell was going on. I didn't see any of the natives on my way over to the lagoon, nor did I see any signs that would lead me to believe that anyone had passed through the area recently. I stayed close to the edge of the forest, but far enough inside it not to be spotted from the beach, should any of the locals happen to wander by. When you're moving around in hostile territory, you have to be extremely careful, and you just can't rush ahead like you would do if you were going on a hike in a forest at home. You move in increments of around 20 to 30 yards, and then stop and hunker down until you've established that the coast is clear, before you start moving again. You also have to make sure that you don't leave any spores behind, such as broken twigs, footprints, or any other signs that would give the people who might want to do you harm any reason to suspect that you're there. It's a cumbersome way of making your way from point A to point B, but it does increase your odds of making it out alive. This is why it took me nearly 5 hours to cover a relatively short distance, but given that I managed to avoid being detected, I reckon that it was worth it. The first thing I did when I reached my destination was to find a suitable hiding spot, and once again, I found a bush that I could crawl into. I was roughly 40 yards above sea level, about 20 yards from the edge of the forest, and had an almost uninterrupted view of the lagoon. I was thirsty, and I awarded myself with a few 100 milliliters of the water in my field canteen before I radioed Dirk to let him know that I was in position. And then I waited, while wondering what was going to happen next. I found out an hour and a half later, when I saw something reflecting the sunlight in the distance. I got my binoculars out of my backpack and aimed it towards the flashing dot in the distance, and saw that it was the Zodiac that had brought me to the island the day before. And as far as I could tell, it was heading straight for the lagoon. I immediately radioed Dirk to find out what the hell was going on. "Dirk, can you read me? This is Mike." But there was no reply, only the familiar background static. "Dirk, can you read me? Over." But still, there was nothing. I muttered a silent curse under my breath, and I raised the binoculars again. The boat was getting closer fast, and it was less than 1 nautical mile away. What the hell are they up to? I thought as the boat gradually grew in size. When they were about half a mile away, I could see that there were 3 people in the boat, 2 males and a female. I frowned and I put the binoculars down for a few moments. This was getting stranger and stranger. I lifted up the binoculars again and watched as the Zodiac entered the lagoon and came right up to the beach. And then I looked on in absolute horror as I saw the 2 passengers, a young woman and a man, by all appearances either Americans or Europeans, jump into the water, grab their backpacks and start walking ashore. A few moments later, the Zodiac turned around and started steaming back towards the entrance of the lagoon at full throttle. I dropped the binoculars and stared open-mouthed at the young duo as they walked further up on the beach, dropped their backpacks in the sand and sat down. Their backs were turned to me, and they were watching the rubber boat as it disappeared in the distance. I felt a sour taste rise up from deep inside my gut, and I noticed that my hand had started to shake. What the hell were they doing here on this island? They obviously had no idea of what type of place this was, that the locals would kill them in the most horrendous manner imaginable if they ever saw them, which meant that the organization had most likely tricked them into this. I felt an ice-cold sensation form inside my stomach, and it quickly spread out towards the rest of my body. I was looking at a pair of human, sacrificial lambs. They had been chosen to die in order to spice things up for the members of Fear Inc. I felt my blood start to boil and I pressed the transmit button on the microphone on my lapel, and then I started whispering furiously into the mouthpiece. "Dirk, what kind of sick games are you guys playing here? Those 2 poor kids will be dead before the top of the hour if you don't turn that Zodiac around and pick them up." I let go of the button, and I listened to the static in my ear. "For fuck's sake, answer me, Dirk." Another few moments passed, and I was about to press it again when I heard Dirk's voice in my ear, calm and collected. "Listen, Mike, I know I didn't tell you about this, but rest assured, it wasn't my decision. I'm just an employee, like yourself. They're going to get killed, Dirk. When the locals see them, they'll chop them into pieces. Jesus Christ, they're only kids. You can't allow that to happen." There was some more static on the line, and for a moment or two, I thought that Dirk had gone away. But then he started talking again. "Would it make you feel any better, Mike, if I told you about why they're here, and give you a lowdown on the crimes that they have committed?" "What do you mean, crimes they've committed?" I could hear him sigh on the other end and then clear his throat. "They're meth heads, Mike. 2 weeks ago in Bangkok, in a drug-induced psychosis, they cut up the stomach of their 3-year-old daughter. After they had finished doing that, they cut her head off and placed it on the windowsill in their living room. Trust me, Mike, these are some truly horrendous people, and they deserve everything that's coming to them." I didn't answer, and Dirk continued, his voice all of a sudden more matter-of-factly. "Your job is to keep an eye on them 24/7 from now on. You're not allowed to contact them, or try to warn them about the natives. And if they are discovered, you are to record the entire thing. I don't believe I have to remind you of your obligations to the organization, Mike. That's it. Good luck, and over and out." And thus, my real mission on North Sentinel Island began. I was the director and sole member of the team that had been tasked with documenting a real-life snuff movie involving 2 kids barely out of high school. I closed my eyes and took half a dozen deep breaths before I picked up the binoculars again and started on my new assignment. Nothing happened on that first day, other than me getting bored out of my brains having to spend 30 hours straight keeping an eye on a young couple hanging out on a beach. But I was a professional, and I had spent more time than that doing surveillance work, so I managed to stick it out. It also gave me ample opportunity to think about what Dirk had told me about the crime that the couple were supposed to have carried out. If it was true, and I didn't really have any reason to doubt that it wasn't, I didn't really care what happened to the 2 of them. I can tolerate a lot of things as far as violence and crimes are concerned, but I absolutely cannot stand people who harm young children, period. In that regard, my mission became slightly easier to accept, and things certainly started to become more interesting the following day. I have since asked Dirk if the couple had been given any instructions before they were set ashore, but he has always denied this. He simply said that the couple took it upon themselves. What they did was to make their way into the forest, towards the center of the island, toward the area where the natives were hanging out. And, as I had been instructed to do, I followed behind them, observing their every move. It was quite easy to do, given how loud they were. You ever seen Hollywood movies depicting young American backpackers in Southeast Asia? They're always loud and rowdy, and they stand out like a cat in a swimming pool. And this young couple played the role very well. Both of them were what I would describe as laid-back, pot-smoking hippie types. The guy, who the woman only referred to as Chase, had long blonde hair tied back into a ponytail, and wore a dirty old sweatband around his head. Every second word coming out of his mouth seemed to be take it easy, cool, and awesome. And after having to spend 12 hours listening to it the first day, I guess you could say that it was starting to rub me the wrong way. The young woman was slightly less annoying, and I'm not quite sure if that was because she talked a whole lot less than Chase. I guess I'll never really know the answer to that question. She had the same long hair as her partner, and she was quite attractive. I've often wondered since how long they would have survived if they would have just stayed on that beach, going off for the occasional swim and just dozing off under their makeshift shelter, which was a piece of tarpaulin stretched out in a 45-degree angle from a rope strung between two poles. If luck had been on their side, maybe they would have lasted a few extra days, maybe even a week. It's impossible to tell. And given that they didn't, it's an exercise in futility to go on about it. The truth of the matter is that they'd only been walking inland for less than an hour before things started to go downhill. It started with these strange noises. To me, it sounded like someone was regurgitating their own vocal cords. My heart skipped a beat, and straight away, I felt the adrenaline rush into my bloodstream. These were not noises made by any of the animals. They were human-made sounds, something that was confirmed a few moments later, when the birds in the trees above us all of a sudden took off. I froze and stood absolutely still, fearing that we were very close to the natives. The young duo, however, seemed oblivious to it all, and they just kept on walking, talking just as loudly as they had before. Oh my god, I thought. They were going to walk straight into them. And then I immediately realized that the same thing applied to me. I had no idea where the natives were. I suspected that they were somewhere ahead of us, but trying to pinpoint the exact location of a sound in the jungle is extremely difficult, and for all I knew, they could be behind us. It was also a real possibility that they already had a visual on us, and that they were getting ready to strike. Shit, why did I get tricked into spying on these kids? I should have insisted on sticking to the original mission and moved around at my own pace. This was crazy, and it could very well get me killed. I quickly scanned my surroundings, but was unable to see anyone apart from the young couple, who were walking ahead of me without the slightest idea of the precarious situation that they were in. My heart was hammering away now, and I was wound taut as a piano wire. And for the first time since I had set foot on the island, I started to feel scared. The strange sounds continued, and I could tell that whoever caused them were approaching. I kneeled down and I rested on my haunches. And then I reached down and I grabbed the knife from the sheath attached to my leg. I clutched it tightly and held it in front of my chest, the hand holding it shaking badly. And then and there it dawned on me that I might have to use it before too long. There's a big tree about 20 yards up ahead, and I decided to make a dash for it. I took a deep breath, stepped away from the bush I was hiding behind, and I made my way towards it. The strange sounds were very close now, and I was finally able to pinpoint where they were coming from. They were coming from directly ahead of us, from the top of the slight hill. I made it safely over to the tree, and carefully stuck my head out to have a look, and that's when it started. There was a whooshing sound, and then the familiar thump that an arrow makes whenever it embeds itself into a tree trunk. I couldn't see where it hit, but I could see Chase turn towards the right and stare at something, so I suspected that the arrow had hit the tree next to him. I was about 40 yards behind the young couple, slightly to the left and at a slightly lower elevation. It took a second or two before they reacted to the arrow, but when they did, it was with a loud, "Holy fuck." A few more seconds passed and I could hear the whooshing sounds of a few more arrows, but still, they were not hitting their targets. But this time, the arrows did jolt the young couple out of their paralysis, and they did what most normal people would have done in this situation. They threw themselves around and bolted back in the direction that they had come from. A few moments later, I got my second glimpse of the natives since arriving on the island, and this time, they were a lot more agitated. There were 4 of them, probably hunters out looking for food, who had accidentally come across the young couple. I stayed where I was, not moving a single muscle. The key to avoid getting spotted in any environment apart from using the right camouflage is to not make any sudden movements. But instead, I followed them with the tiny camera attached to my hat. I turned my head very slowly, doing my utmost to do it as smoothly as possible. This was what the members of Fear Inc. wanted to see, and this is what they paid their premium memberships for. This and the scenes that would play out when the hunters finally caught up with the young couple and killed them. What a freaking sick and messed up world this was, I thought to myself. I waited until the natives had passed me, and when relieved to discover that they hadn't noticed me, then I counted to 3 and pushed myself away from the tree. And this time, I was running too. Not that there was any real danger of losing track of them. The young woman was screaming hysterically, and the natives were making their loud regurgitating sounds. At the same time, they were sending off more arrows, and I could see one of them throwing a spear. I stepped out of the vegetation and found a natural path that I could follow, about 40 yards or thereabouts behind the natives and slightly to the right. We were making our way back towards the beach. Millions of thoughts were racing through my head at that very moment, but the one that kept repeating itself was whether the young couple was going to make it out of the forest or not. I also wondered if they realized the futility of their actions, that it didn't matter how long they ran for, that in the end, the natives would catch up with them, and this whole thing would come to an abrupt end. Their fates had been sealed the moment they jumped off of that Zodiac. I kept on running for another minute, and then I stopped and I took cover behind a tree. I could see the woman lying on the ground, her hands pressed against her thigh. There was an arrow there, and blood was seeping out through the wound. I didn't see when it had struck her, but I did see the moment when the natives caught up with her. She was screaming frantically, and when they stopped in front of her, her arms shot out to protect herself. In addition to this, she was kicking with her good leg, as if she believed that this would somehow keep them at bay. But she was no match for the guy with the spear, who ran forward, holding it high above his head with both hands, and then thrusting it in a quick, downward motion. The weapon hit her lower abdomen, and I was able to see the wooden weapon bury itself into her body. Her face contorted in pain, and the screams intensified. I was only 30 yards away, and I could see everything that was going on. And then the others joined in. They were shooting arrows at her, and hitting her with what looked like mattocks and scythes. And the only words that can truly describe what I was witnessing were barbaric savagery. They were attacking her like she was a worthless rodent. The regurgitating sounds were interspersed with the thick slashing sounds of the sharp implements piercing her skin, and the hard wooden clubs hitting her bones, shattering them. I felt physically ill, and I twitched uncontrollably. This was on par with the incident I had witnessed in the Congo some years earlier. The woman by this stage had realized that facing them with her arms stretched out was not a good strategy, and against all odds, she had managed to turn over onto her side, and was now attempting to drag herself away. But it was no use. The injuries that she had sustained had tapped her of all her strength, and it was only a matter of time before it would all be over. And as it turned out, I didn't have to wait for that long. A few moments later, it came to a quick end when the native with the spear rammed it through the back of her neck and plunged the sharp tip through her throat. At that point, everything stopped. Her attempts at getting away, the hysterical screams, and I guess, her will to live. It had taken less than 4 minutes from the time the natives had first discovered the young couple until the time the woman was lying motionlessly on the ground, blood covering most of her body. I looked around, but her boyfriend was nowhere to be seen. He was probably still running towards the beach, trying to save his own hide. I remember having ambivalent feelings about his actions. On one hand, he was a coward for leaving his girlfriend behind, but on the other hand, he was doing what most people do when they're in full-blown panic mode, trying to get away from the imminent threat. I also reminded myself of what they had done to their little girl. Her treatment had been just as bad as the one that I had just witnessed. I held on to that thought in order to better deal mentally with what I had just seen. They did not pursue her boyfriend, at least not straight away. There were other things to take care of, such as tying vines around the young woman's head and hoisting her up from the forest floor. They used a thick branch to achieve. Right next to the ocean, where he wasn't visible from the forest. If you only had to hide for a few hours, this spot would have been perfect. But if you had to spend a prolonged period here, it wouldn't do you any good. There was no natural cover, and after a few hours in the hot daytime sun without any water, your brain would start to fry. A good strategy would have been to move to another location after the sun went down, then head back to the campsite, get some water and provisions, and find a new location to lay low. But this guy was not an experienced soldier, and he had just witnessed a very traumatic episode, so he remained where he was. I did get a visual on him a few hours after sundown, and he was literally hanging onto the boulder for dear life, his face pressed into the rock as if it would somehow make it harder for the natives to spot him. That night, as I settled into my new hiding spot, overlooking the cluster of boulders, I knew that he wouldn't see another sunset. The natives would resume their search the following morning, and they would give him the same treatment that his girlfriend had received, a brutal and painful death. One part of me felt a tiny bit of sympathy for him, but the other and much more dominant part of my brain felt that he was getting his just desert. In my opinion, child killers deserve no mercy. I was right about the natives resuming their search the following day. I saw them approach the section of boulders just after 9:30 in the morning, and this time there was a whole lot more of them. I counted 7 men on the beach, and I guessed that there were probably more of them scouring the forest. The sight made me slightly apprehensive. At that point, I had no idea how good they were at reading spores and how thorough they would be. If they decided to do a proper search of the entire island, I could find myself in a whole lot of trouble, and I could quite possibly be their third victim. I tried to brush aside the thoughts and worry about that later on should my fears turn into reality. For now, the only thing I had to focus on was the child killer hiding behind the boulder and his rendezvous with death. The natives grew in size in my binoculars, and they were now less than 100 yards away. Very carefully, I pushed the record button on the camera and put the binoculars aside, and I prepared myself for what was about to happen next. They discovered him less than half a minute later, when one of the hunters went behind the big stone. I couldn't see what happened at that exact moment, but I could see the guy for a few seconds later when he jumped into the water, and I could see the spear that came flying after him moments later. The water immediately turned red, and the hunter that had thrown the spear jumped out after him. A struggle ensued, and some of the other hunters joined the fray. One of them pushed the guy's head underwater and held it there until he stopped moving. I guess the whole thing took less than a minute. And then they dragged the guy ashore and started stabbing him with their scythe-like weapons up on the beach. The bright sand turned red, and the body jerked and twisted every time that it was hit. They were going at it with an aggressiveness that I found hard to fathom. They really hated the guy, and they really wanted to kill him. And the only crime that he was guilty of in their eyes was coming ashore of their island. They continued for another couple of minutes, and by that stage, the guy was truly dead. His body looked like a big piece of flesh that had been dipped in a tub of red dye. Parts of his skin had been peeled away from his muscles, and I could see right down to the bone. When they were done, another very unnerving thing happened. One of the hunters all of a sudden ran towards my hiding spot. I felt my blood go cold, and I had to will myself to lay still. There was no way that he could have seen me. And then when he was about 20 yards away from me, he came to an abrupt stop and he raised his hand in the air. His upper body was covered in the victim's blood, and he had a feral look on his face, as if he had ingested some very potent drugs. The bow in his hand was looking extremely menacing, and I hoped that he wasn't about to fire one of those arrows in my direction. Luckily he didn't, but he started shouting and screaming and hopping up and down. I've often thought later on that he must have suspected that there were other unwanted people on the island, and that it was his way of letting them know that they were next. This routine went on for another few minutes, before he turned around and he walked back to the others. The episode had really shaken me up, and I closed my eyes and I focused on my breathing. When I opened them again, I could see the natives were in the process of dragging the guy by his legs further up on the beach. Unfortunately, his head was turned in my direction and I was able to see his face. His mouth was wide open, as were his eyes, and he reminded me of a dead fish, staring stupidly into the distance. It was a horrendous way to die, even though he himself had committed a horrendous crime. Maybe God, that is if he actually exists, would have mercy on his soul and take him into his fold. But even if that didn't happen and he was taken straight down to hell, it couldn't be much worse than what he had gone through for the last minute of his life. I spent another 5 days on that island after that, and as I had expected, the natives did a thorough search of the place. For the next 3 days, they went over the southern and western part of the island, and a few times, I was very close to getting discovered. One of the natives passed less than 3 feet away from the ditch where I was lying under a thick cover of leaves and branches. I could see the scars on his legs and the thick soles on his feet. I could also see the bottom part of his spear that he used as a walking stick. But thankfully, he didn't notice me, and 7 days after I first set foot on the island, I left the place. I swam out of the lagoon, attached my aqua-long flippers and weight belt, and continued another mile out from the shore. There, I signaled with my flashlight and guided the Zodiac to my position. I had survived my mission yet again, and I earned my completion fee. Now, all I wanted to do was relax for a few weeks, recharge my batteries, and try to get the terrible things I had seen on that island out of my system. I couldn't wait to return to civilization and live like a normal person for a while.